OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
The battle for the soul and the future of Irish football begins tonight. The Stephen Kenny era is upon us. We're going to be getting in depth with that over the course of the next 2.5 hours. We're also going to go to Spain to get the very latest on the Lionel Messi story. We'll bring you some details on what's happening in the US Open and why you should be tuning into the tennis, because it's starting to get pretty good. On top of that, loads more as well. Jeff Benedict is going to talk to us about the Patriots dynasty. He's got a brilliant new book out which tells the tripartite story of the owner, the head coach and the quarterback from the most successful and winningest NFL team in history. So that's coming your way between now and 10 o'clock this morning. In the meantime, sit back, relax and enjoy Wednesday Night Rugby with Keith Wood and Roy O'Connor in conversation with our own Joe Malloy.
I think that's right too. There were at the start of professionalism for a while. There was the relegation playoff, or the winner of the first division played the Premiership bottom team over two legs. That happened for a while. Economically, it's quite interesting because if you're a team that isn't a very, very big team and you're one of the T4 teams, you're going to get a home tie against one of the really, really big teams. That's going to be a sellout. So that's one of the guarantees that you have. The quarterfinals will be incredibly tough encounters because you're looking to see, will it be the top 8 teams from the 3 leagues that get to the quarterfinals that they're then playing off, you know. And some of the problems of the Heineken Cup over the last number of years, actually on both formats, were if you were in a group with a very poor team, or with a team from France that didn't take it very seriously, you could top that group and very, very easily. It's pretty unfair. This seems to be tough all out, to be honest, because every team, the number 8 team in any of the leagues, will want to go to the Heineken Cup and will want to do well in it.
Let's look ahead to the semi-finals then in the Pro 14. Leinster, Munster on Friday night, and Ulster away to Edinburgh on the Saturday. By the by, Rory, if we're talking about making the best of situations and coming up with formats which work, I think the Pro 14 deserve a bit of credit here. This has worked very well, I think. I mean, everybody's interested in inter-pros and domestic derbies. They've been 2 nice games, 2 nice weekends, and now we're into the semi-finals. It's neat, it's tidy. It's not ideal, but I think they happened upon a very good solution, in fairness to them.
Yeah, and they haven't been flogging the players in the same way they have done in England, where that's resulted in, they've had a couple of decent games in the Premiership, but there's been a lot of blowouts because the squads aren't deep enough. They're trying to run off all their games. The Pro 14 were realistic. Obviously, they have more challenges in terms of borders, and they said, right, let's just have 2 rounds of in-country games to prove we can do it, and then we move into the knockouts. I think they got a little bit lucky in that Ulster and Edinburgh are from the same jurisdiction, so don't have the quarantining problems that maybe might come up next week for the final, or need to be waved away, or they have challenge they have to get over. But no, it has worked, and last weekend was a bit more like a normal Pro 14 weekend, and often the last round of Pro 14 fixtures before the knockouts is not that inspiring. So, and it kind of saw it like they were fairly. We kind of knew who the quarterfinal or semi-finals would be towards the end. But it's been a pretty good product. The games have been exciting, they've been interesting, and it's set up for a really, really good, intriguing round of semi-finals with plenty of plot lines to get stuck into.
Yeah, there's loads to talk about. I mean, Friday's particularly intriguing, Keith, for many reasons. Obviously, it's knockout and it's Leinster, Munster and all of those things. But you have Leinster cruising. They've used 38-odd players in the 2 games. They've had 2 different starting 15s. I think their winning record is, 21 games in a row. And they're up against Munster, who weren't that far away 10 days ago or so. Munster have a 5-day turnaround, but crucially, this is it. It's win or bust. I mean, physically, they are going to throw the kitchen sink here at Leinster. Their need is greater.
Their need is the same. Do you
not think it's much greater? I mean, for Leinster have bigger fish to fry. If they lose this, it's a hiccup. I mean, Munster's whole season is over here if they don't win this, no?
It was funny, I had a long conversation with Martin Johnson last week, and he was talking about the when you're winning all the time, that it becomes, which is a rare thing for, we don't get to say that too often, but Leinster have, that it becomes very difficult to hold on and to keep winning and to keep winning and to keep winning as the team changes. I've just noticed on the Leinster side, partly because the vast majority of the players are homegrown, that drive is still there. So I would think that all the players that are in there, we can often think of Leinster being a team, but there's been a huge amount of new players that have come in over the last 2, 3, 4 years, and they've had a taste of it, but they want more. So I think it's the same call when you get to a semi-final. So you're not going to say, we're used to winning these semi-finals and we have a bigger one that we want to win in a few weeks' time. Will they take it any easier? They won't at all, Joe. I just don't see it. I mean, it's huge for almost the history of Munster, and the fact that they have a fairly large losing record against Leinster, that they will want to rectify that, but they want to win silverware. So physically and mentally for this game, there are no excuses. And you can talk about 5-day turnaround, and I hope nobody talks about it, because that is just the reality of what they have to deal with. They need to go out and tinker with their game a little, change it to try and find a couple of more holes in Leinster's defence, because I thought they played really, really well. And I thought they got a bit of a shock when some of their players went off injured, so they had to react accordingly. And I thought they went about the game last weekend with sort of quiet efficiency, without fully setting the world alight. I think they need more in their armoury for Friday, but I actually think that they have a really good chance of upsetting Leinster's dreams of this year of a double, because I do think there is a change. There's subtle changes to Munster. They're playing a bit better, from some of the stop-start earlier on in the season. It's very hard to kind of even discuss it in that fashion, because they've only played 2 matches with it. But those 2 matches were to get to this match. So, and same for Leinster, actually. Leinster's 2 matches were to get to this point where they're at the business end of cup competitions. So I actually think it's going to be enthralling. I've enjoyed all the matches over the last 2 weeks for different reasons, and I had very little of expectation for any of them. Because of the layoff, but some of the quality has been fantastic. Some of the players aren't hitting the standards that they were earlier on, and that's for a variety of different reasons. But I just think it's set up as being one of those great games. And will it damage Munster if they don't get there? I think it will, but I think they'll get over it to try and do it again next year. And they've no right to win it just because they haven't won against Leinster for a while.
Their record against Leinster is 1 in 8, so we're going back over quite a while now, and it's 1 in 8, and they've lost their last 2 semi-finals in the Pro 14 to Leinster. It was something that Graham Rowntree was asked about. Have a listen.
Just have a different feel. No, it's knockout rugby, isn't it? Against the team. I mean, they had the luxury of resting guys at the weekend, and they'll have had a good hit out yesterday, which we weren't able to do, but we crack on with it. I'm happy with where we are mentally and physically at the moment going into this game. We've played against them enough, and previous form means nothing to me or this team. Going into this game means nothing. All I'm really stressing to the guys is how hardened we are going into this game. Given not played rugby for a long time, very quickly we're battle and match ready going into a huge game. We've got to be better across the board against the current champions. And we've had 2 games now to get used to what's going on in the breakdown. So I expect us to be better there, more clinical there, not shell as many penalties as we did on Sunday in the breakdown. So, there's wholesome areas for us to be better at, but I'm confident that we're going in the right way.
Keith, you've been in, say, Irish sides, for instance, that routinely lost against certain sides, and logically, Graham Rowntree is right. I mean, the past should have no real bearing on what's about to happen, and yet it's hard not to think a record of 1 in 8 against Leinster doesn't come with some kind of psychological baggage or become an extra obstacle of sorts. What was your experience of having very bad records against certain teams?
I had some really horrendous records. I remember being at a press conference in, I would say, 97, where we had 6 new first caps playing against the All Blacks, and in the press conference on the Friday I said we probably had a 25-1 chance of beating them, since we'd never beaten them before, and this is an incredibly young team. And people were saying afterwards that was very negative, but I was taking the one chance. I wasn't being negative at all. I said there is a chance there for us, and we went out and we played And we were pretty good in the first half and we fell away at the end of it, but we started to believe that actually, that you can beat them. So I can't say that no player thinks about it, but some players may get burdened by it. But I don't think you can look at a team and say they're burdened by it. The team has to say and go into every game saying, yeah, they're a better team than we are maybe. On their day, they can be better than we are. Our job is to make certain that they're not on their day, that we can destabilise them wherever we possibly can, that we take every chance that we can, that we have that sense of discipline that you have to go out and win it. And sometimes that's all you have. You have to take every chance and keep your discipline. And that can be enough. I don't think it's enough against Leinster. I think we need to create more than we have done. And I'd like to see us play at a slightly faster tempo. And if that happens, I think there's a risk to that, because if the higher tempo means your error rate goes up, that might open more opportunities for Leinster. But I think that's the risk Munster have to take. And look, there's days when you know you're playing against a better team, but you don't go out with a view that you're going to lose, and you go out with a view to say, what is there possible that I can turn into my favour or into our team's favour to make this be possible for us? And I don't think there's such a huge gap between them. I think Leinster have a phenomenal squad. Really, really great squad. A lot of great young guys coming through who seem to step up very, very quickly and easily. And they're the envy of all teams in the Northern Hemisphere, to be honest, with that strength and depth. But I still think you can beat them. And Munster's view is that they have to be able to, and they have to not give up easy scores. So the one difference I felt, critical difference 2 weeks ago, was that it was very hard for Munster to score. And it was easier for Leinster to score. So Munster have to be really, really meagre in defence. They have to let nothing go through, no easy scores, no easy penalties.
Certain aspects of Munster's game worked really well against Leinster, Rory. Like, line-out has been very strong. They won all 13 of their own line-outs against Leinster. They stole 3, and they were 100% again off their own line-out against Connacht. They had 22 from 22. And at the breakdown, they've been very good as well. Even CJ Stander on his own had 4 penalty turnovers against Leinster. So there are certainly aspects of their play they can be very happy with and feel good about going into Friday. If you had to boil down the concern, it probably is the point Keith made and quite a few people have made. It looks a much more difficult task for them to score tries than it does for Leinster.
It's got to be a big concern to them that they threw so much at Leinster 2 weeks ago and did so much right and undermined so many key facets of Leinster's game really well. Like, they beat them in the air, both in play and out of touch. They they won the breakdown battle, and yet they still lost the game, albeit by 2 points after a missed conversion that was a very difficult kick. And you were catching Leinster a little bit cold. They hadn't played in the same amount of time as Munster. You would imagine Leinster will have learned an awful lot from that game, and I'm not sure how much room for growth Munster will have from that performance. I think Munster threw an awful lot at Leinster 2 weeks ago, and still went on sitting on that bus going home. They had that familiar feeling, and just even thinking about those the semi-final record. I mean, the last 2 years Leinster have been coming into this game off the back of the first year they'd won the Heineken Champions Cup in Bilbao, and last year they were coming back off the game in Newcastle, and they're both the following weekends, and they rotated heavily. They started Ross Byrne last year, if I remember correctly. He may have even started the year before, I can't remember exactly, but the first one was a very tight game. Max Stephen got a turnover in the last minute, but Leinster won, and I think was more comfortable last year. But Leinster were able to rotate heavily and still win the game, and this year they don't have to do that. They've been the team that's been able to rest up and have keep Graham Rowntree mentioned training on Monday. They train fully with this team on Friday with Munster in mind, so they've been focusing on this game from further out as well. So I'm reminded a little bit of after the 2013 Pro 14 final. It was probably the Pro 12 back then. Johan Muller had just played his last game, and he was asked about kind of his legacy and his time with Ulster, and he was kind of one of these great statesmen-like captains from South Africa, and he just kind of smiled and he said, we could have done a lot here. We've done a lot here. We brought this team on. I'm just unfortunate that my time at Ulster came at the same time that Leinster had this team. And Leinster have a different team now, but I would say Peter O'Mahony, Conor Murray, Keith Earls, CJ Stander, Dave Kilcoyne will all have kind of similar feelings about Leinster, that albeit they haven't gone as close as Ulster, they haven't been to a European final, they haven't been to as many Pro 14 finals as that Ulster team. They kind of find their route to the top blocked by their nearest rivals, who are just, even though they've transformed in the intervening period, are still the best team out there. And, you know, at full strength, I find it very difficult to see how Munster beat them.
It'd be interesting to see if Jordan Larmour is thrown back in at 15, Keith. Munster targeted him the last day with some degree of success as well. Rob Kearney was his usual efficient self under the high ball in the most recent game.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see. I thought Larmour was exposed, not just because he's not as tall as Rob Kearney, but because it was almost as if his players didn't entirely trust him. They were in his way for him to get up to the ball, and they were protecting him as well. And that could be just because they've been out of the game. I wonder how many kicks have been landed on the fullbacks in the last few weeks, in training. So that's kind of part and parcel of it. He's a good player who has been very good on the wing, and that was it wasn't his first outing, but it was first outing when it looked like that was going to be his jersey to fill for the next number of years with Leinster and Ireland, and it didn't go as well for him. But like all the players that you're talking about, I don't think any of them have nailed on their Irish jerseys on the back of the performances over the last 2 weeks, but I don't think they've lost it either. So I still think we're waiting and seeing players trying to get in and their head around actually playing rugby again. So I'm not so quick to bring out the long knives just yet on different people. But for Rob Kearney, then, of course, he comes on at the weekend and is just the most comfortable goalie of all time. So life is simpler. But at some stage you have to make a view towards the future.
Delande and Farrell, Rory, against Ringrose and Henshaw will be, again, well worth watching on Friday night. Kieran Frawley, though, I know you wanted to touch on him. He was man of the match at 12, and we've obviously seen him do his stuff at out half for the last couple of years. I'm right in saying Conor O'Brien, I think, is injured. So beyond Robbie Henshaw, is Frawley now potentially next man in at 12 for Leinster, or is there someone obvious I'm not thinking of here?
Well, Joe Manny left at the end of last season as well, so there is a bit of a vacancy there. They lost Noel Reid to Leicester the previous season, so he had been their kind of stand-in 12. Rory O'Loughlin can play 12 and 13, but I think they're lining Frawley up as a 12 who can play 10 over the next while. And I think he's a very different player to both Conor O'Brien and Robbie Henshaw, both very direct players. And I thought he gave Leinster a different dimension at the weekend that's going to be quite hard to ignore if he keeps replicating that performance. I thought the way he kind of doubled up with Ross Byrne was excellent. The way he stepped in to play 10, I thought they just looked like they always look like a really slick team. And I'm not entirely, like, Johnny Sexton's done it before with Owen Farrell. I'd love to see in a big game him come in and do it. I don't think he's going to displace Robbie Henshaw this weekend. But if I was Robbie Henshaw, I'd be getting a little bit worried about the prospect of Leinster turning more towards having a second playmaker, because it really opens up the way that Leinster can play the game. And I think if either Henshaw or Ringrose goes down in the next little while, and look, they're going to be on Ireland duty for a long time, so Frawley will get a lot of time in the jersey if he stays fit. I think the opportunity will be there. Just to touch on the other debate, I mean, I asked Lancaster about whether... I think as a journalist, I'd love Rob Kearney to come in for his final 3 or 4 games for Leinster and, change the whole thing, and it'd be a great story. But I did ask Lancaster on Monday about it. He did quite heavily big up Hugo Keenan. There is a vacancy there for Dave Kearney, who's injured. So the option is there to switch Larmour to 14 and start Rob Kearney at 15. But he did. They like Hugo Keenan, and they were quite happy with how he went to 14 at the weekend. So I'd be interested to see. I think, like, you're seeing people like Hugo Keenan, like Will Connors, I think is pushing big time for a 7 shirt, and Frawley did himself absolutely no harm at all when it comes to this weekend. Last weekend, if your whole thing is that you pick on form and players play that well against Ulster, having not gone brilliantly against Munster but won a week previously, it's going to be interesting to see if they back any of those guys this weekend.
If we're talking options then, so Frawley at centre, another area I wanted to touch on with you, Rory, is Leinster's back row. I mean, if you get any rugby fan at the moment and say, name all of Leinster's back row players, there is a fair chance they'll forget someone brilliant. There are just that many of them. Are they going to be able to keep all of these guys happy, notwithstanding the fact that this is one of the more attritional areas of the field?
They seem to be able to do that, and I'd love to hear Keith's insight into how a player who's as good as, say, Will Connor's coming through. He's obviously a coming man, but Dan Levy is possibly going to miss out this weekend. Obviously coming back off a massive injury. But if you think that the starting sevens last weekend, Will Connors was playing for Leinster. He went to Clongowes. Jordy Murphy, I think, was starting for Ulster. He's Blackrock. Conor Oliver is started for Connacht. He's Blackrock from via Skerries. And Munster had a guy from South Africa, Chris Clute. And then Leinster have 4 absolute quality open sides. Levy, Van der Fleer, Connors would have been capped for during the Six Nations if it had continued. You're talking about leaving out 2. And Scott Penny, who's the coming man. And I think we all, after the World Cup, are looking for him to make a big breakthrough. And he's had some opportunity this year, but not as much as maybe he would have wanted. I think Rhys Ruddock and Dan Levy are probably not going to be involved this weekend. Very few clubs in Europe could afford to leave players of that calibre out. That's if they go with a 6-2 split. If they don't go with a 6-2 split, then Max Deegan might miss out. He's another Ireland international. I mean, picking the right 3 is a big challenge for Lancaster and Cullen this week. And Connors brings an awful lot of what you need against Munster in terms of his ability to both chop tackle but also dominant tackle as well. But if you put him in, you lose Van der Fleer's energy, and against a team on a 5-day turnaround, you might regret that. So it's a really tough thing to do when players are that good and they're all playing that well. Like Josh Murphy was very good last weekend, and he's probably hasn't got a sniff this week. It's keeping that balancing act of keeping those players happy. It must be very tricky, but they seem to manage it quite well.
Yeah, I think they've managed it because people have been injured. And that's part of the attritional nature of the game, is that so many players are injured all the time. But for me, Will Connors is the most destructive 7 around at the moment. I think he plays particularly well. He looks big, strong, confident. I haven't seen a huge amount of him with the ball in his hand, so it offers a high level of balance for some of the other players. And look, for me, I keep saying it time and time again, I like Max Deegan because of the particular type of athleticism he has. So, look, they can mix and match in whatever way they want and play any game in whichever way they want.
Yeah, it's a high-class problem. Munster's tied 5, Keith, before we move on to Ulster. I want to get your thoughts briefly on Brian O'Driscoll was on Monday, was saying it's a potential area of weakness now, especially when they get into the business end of competitions. Obviously, Sneeman and his injury is a big blow, and Jean Klein's injured as well at the moment. Munster's tied 5 and how they can mix it with the best sides. Is that a serious area of concern for you?
I don't know it's a serious area of concern. I think the front row can mix it pretty well. I think it isn't just in the contact at the scrum, it's also in the line out, it's also in the maul. I'd like Munster's maul defence to be better, definitely. I think with Tyg Byrne back, there seems to be a higher level of flexibility on the line-out options. I thought Wycherley did incredibly well, and we have to start trusting the young guys that are coming through, and injury throws you into that mix. He's going to grow up very, very quickly in this game. This is a very big game for him. But he's got something about him too. And it is about how the front row and second row combine properly at scrum time to make certain that there's not too much pressure on them, that the back row gets stuck in with them as well. So if the pack operate as a pack at scrum time, they can protect each other. They can gain the experience as the game goes along. They can understand you, like you're learning in real time almost with some of these things. But I'm not that worried by them. I'm a bit upset to see Killer getting injured because he's a big ball carrier. So I would say there are not great ball carriers for the most part in the front 5. That's an area of weakness. You're looking for other players to step up.
So prediction time then, because I do want to get your thoughts on Ulster. I think, Rory, you said it's hard to see past Leinster. I think, Keith, ultimately, we throw around all these various different arguments and talking points, and what kind of looms large is the point you made almost at the outset, that it's just that bit harder for Munster to score, and you just suspect Leinster will find a way.
I mean, Leinster are favourites, comfortable favourites, I would say, even though they only won by 2 points a couple of weeks ago. But I see that Munster have a very big game in them. And when you're able to put all your eggs into this basket, and they decide that they go all out for this in every way, shape or form, can they do that and keep the composure? And if they can, I think it becomes one of the great games. And that's what I'm hoping for. And I think they have an opportunity to win.
Okay, we'd certainly take one of the great games. Rory, what kind of margin are you nodding towards Leinster?
I mean, when you think the comment that 2 players sent off in the first 35 minutes of the weekend, and you think how much could go wrong, it's got, the margins are quite difficult. I think Leinster could be quite comfortable towards the end if they get things right. I think they have the capacity to dominate. Like, I expect them to learn from the line-out issues and get the aerial stuff right. Even if Larimer's there, we've seen him get it right before. Say the first game of the World Cup, he started against Scotland. He was very good in that area. You know, he can do it. So I think they'll be more comfortable. And I just think sometimes, to touch on what Keith said there, Munster become very reliant on CJ Stander. And if say someone like Will Connors takes Stander and basically man marks him, and just they meet him at the line and he doesn't get the go forward ball, like Leinster have gang tackled him out of the game before, then it's going to be a very difficult evening for Munster. So I think Leinster could, be 7+ anyway, and comfortable enough towards the end.
Okay. Edinburgh Ulsters on Saturday evening. If lockdown has interrupted the momentum of any team, it's certainly Ulster, Keith. I mean, they were flying for much of this season on the back of last season, and just a bit slow out of the blocks thus far. But I mean, it's not like they have much time to get going. The news is that Jacob Stockdale, Stuart McCluskey and Jordy Murphy are all doubts for the game. We're still waiting on confirmation to see if they can make it. I mean, geez, if you lose Stockdale and McCluskey and Addison is already out, that pretty much negates the back line, which has got them into these kind of positions.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, it's been interesting watching them. There were a huge amount of calls for Cooney to usurp Murray earlier on in the season, and pretty good calls too, by the way, because Cooney was on fire, playing behind a pack of forwards who were putting the ball on a plate for him, and he was playing with a high level of confidence. That energy hasn't been evident in the last couple of weeks. That's the thing that's got it, not necessarily from him, but from the team around him. So I feel he has suffered a little bit because of it. He hasn't been in that commanding performance. I thought Madigan at the weekend was taking the ball very deep, and it's very hard when your 10 takes it deep and he's passing it flat or deep to get over the gain line. And it just felt as if, I can't say they were going through the motions, because that's not right either. They just have taken much longer to get into the tempo. So what has been very interesting is Munster and Leinster's accuracy and pace has been, for the most part, very high. And that wasn't evident and hasn't been evident with Ulster so far. So they need to get to the match pace very, very quickly, because they need to bring it from the very start. And they seem to be kind of feeling their way to get into a game. And they just haven't looked like a huge threat. And even McCluskey, and I'm a fan of McCluskey too, and he takes a risk, and I like that at times. I don't know whether I'd necessarily like it if I was a coach, but a lot of his risks he's taking are going to ground, and earlier on in the year they weren't. They were going to hand. So it's whatever it's required, I think, at this stage. But they need their energy. They need, if they don't turn up with energy at the game, they're going to suffer.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
Looking for a football show with a bit of a twist?
So I know the likes of Griezmann's big into his fashion.
He wanted a lot. One question he actually asked me was, could he make his studs light up when he runs?
Team 33, the football magazine show for the football purists.
Yeah, the Nike Mercurials from 1998. If you just show that boot to an entire generation of people, and they just get instantly nostalgic and remember everything from that era.
The very best interviews with the cult heroes of the past, and a look at the cultural side of football. Team 33. Live at 9 p.m. every Friday on OTB Sports Radio. Live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Into sports.
20 yards out. Ursh to shoot. Dungeon! Oh, what a goal from Fabinho! Wow!
Then get into the all-new OTB Sports app.
I think when he apologises to me, I probably will say hello to him. Yeah, no.
Videos, sports news, live scores, interviews.
If Fabregas is going to come up to me in the street and give me some of the mouth that he would have given me on a football pitch, what do we get a slap?
Plus, exclusive content on the OTB Podcast Network. The biggest names in sports, ready when you are. Search OTB Sports on your app store and download it now.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
There you go. And we're live. Here it's 8 o'clock this Thursday morning. You're very welcome along to OTB AM. It's Gilroy and Eoin Sheahan with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Owen, how are you?
Very well, Ger. How are things?
You were on a bit of a break, and every time you're away, viral video emerges of people going completely book mental. And this time it was in your wheelhouse / the part of the world where you were. So how was Wild Nights in Killarney? And were you the guy on top of the telephone box?
That was certainly me. Just to clarify, there seems to be a bit of misinformation going around about that particular video. It was not a telephone box, it's a defibrillator in Killarney that actually exists in that telephone box. So you can insert your own punchline there, which shouldn't be too hard to find.
How appropriate.
How appropriate is right. Unfortunately, I wasn't even in the county at that point, but I did tut the video while also watching it a million times to see, do I know that person? Do I know that person? Do I know that person? God, that person looks very like insert unnamed person here, but it turned out it wasn't that person. And you know, things get through the ether a little bit. You try to investigate who were these people bringing our county into disrepute, and it turns out it was Dubs down for the weekend. And that's it. I'll have no more questions about it. That's it.
Okay.
There'll be no Kerry people involved.
The Kerry Mafia WhatsApp group was lit by all accounts.
Oh, without question. From a private school in Dublin, I think, is where the fingers were firmly being pointed. You know, that down on a trip, whatever, what time of the year is it? Right before schools kick off again, you know, because that makes sense.
Well, it was the Leaving Certs. What was the Olympics that they had in the pool in Thailand?
The Koh Samui Cup.
The Killarney Cup. There you go.
You can't go to Koh Samui, but you can come to Killarney Main Street and stand on a defibrillator. That is how you live your life in 2020.
We're like the Secret Seven. We've solved the riddle of who was behind the Killarney Cup and who indeed was on top of the defibrillator, which is very important information that you've brought to the public this morning on. So thanks very much for that. 0879 180 180 if you want to share any more of that type of video. We're happy to black people's faces out and illuminate them, or maybe we'll just put them public. Who knows? Have we reached that stage of public shaming yet? I'm not sure. Anyway, let's move on because today is the biggest day in Irish football in a long time. Oh, and I put it to you that the Stephen Kenny era is a battle for the future of the soul of Irish football. And in fairness to him, he hasn't shied away from that whatsoever. He has absolutely embraced the notion that he wants his team to redefine how we are thought about on the global stage, that there won't be any lazy assertions from the opposition manager coming in going, well, you know, they're a very British team. They like to get the ball forward to the two big men they have up front, and they press a little bit, but mostly they sit back and they don't really want to keep the ball that much, which is the exact shorthand that opposition managers have used for, well, all the way back to, you could argue, since we had Roy Keane in the team. And even then, they would still come and patronise us with, very spirited team, this Ireland team. Not great at the football though, and we'll see through them. So, if this doesn't work, we're screwed.
Screwed in which way? Now, are you talking about the fact that we will never be able to put style before anything else ever again? That we won't be able to feel excited about a manager who has manage a team and play football in an attractive manner, that pragmatism will win? Are you saying that this is the argument up for debate here?
I think that if the Stephen Kenny era isn't successful, it's going to be a very long time before we get anybody who comes in and talks about playing good quality football. The next manager will automatically be like, this is a results game. If Stephen Kenny, if this era is not successful, we are going to enter into a new era of Ireland managers who are mediocre / failed Premier League / Championship managers. So come on down, Alan Kirbishley. Maybe we can just about afford the king of them all. Come on down, Sam Allardyce. You've got that Limerick link after all. That if the Stephen Kenny era is unsuccessful, actually the whole infrastructure in Irish football rests on this now working, because Stephen Kenny is the best manager that has come out of Ireland in a generation. And if he is not successful, then all of a sudden the self-confidence that the league has, the self-confidence that the people working in football in Ireland has, is going to be knocked. Think about the two big stories that have happened over the last couple of weeks involving the League of Ireland and commentary around the Ireland team, which has set the agenda. It was the alleged pub league jibe from John Sheridan, and it was a fairly mild assertion from Jason McAteer that there's going to be a job of work for Stephen Kenny to do to convince these players that he's the right man for the job, as there is in any new person taking over a job. But the fact that he used the word pedigree, the suggestion was that the league and football in Ireland isn't quite at the position yet where you can automatically have a throughput of talent, right? If that fails, then the visceral reaction that you heard to the pub league jibe, whether or not it actually happened, and to McAteer, that was a defensive, reflexive, no, oh no. What if there's a grain of truth in what's being said? I felt that was kind of part of the backlash against both those things. Now, look, John Sheridan, whatever, hasn't won friends and influenced people just yet, so that didn't help. But like, if Stephen Kenny doesn't work, then come on, how do you come back from that? How does domestic football come back from that? He's their best and their brightest.
I agree with you on half of that. Definitely on the point that there will be a Sam Allardyce-shaped hole that will be addressed in the Ireland manager's job if this goes down the toilet pretty quickly from Stephen Kenny. Just on that point, first of all, I don't think either of us are suggesting here that there is immediate pressure on Stephen Kenny. I certainly don't think that. I think he's going to get a good few months at this at the very least. I think he should be given at the very minimum a full year to actually implement a style of football, to actually try and build up some cohesion in an international team, which, as we all know, takes a long time to do. So I hope we're not having any conversations about this, regardless of the results, for at least another year. But if this era is not to be successful, you're right, the FAI are probably going to go and favour pragmatism, which tends to favour results when it comes to Ireland in recent history. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that the League of Ireland need to have a checking of their confidence, or that Irish football people need to check their own confidence. The very fact that Stephen Kenny got the opportunity to become Republic of Ireland manager should be the boost of confidence that the League of Ireland are operating off right now. The fact that a League of Ireland team were in the group stages of the Europa League, and he was a pretty bloody good.
Yeah, but this is a cycle. Good. This is a repetition of
manager.
This is a repetition of a cycle. This is exactly the Brian Kerr gets the gig. There's this crazy, amazing outpouring of emotion. Do you remember? Was it Brian Cowan was made Taoiseach, right? And all of Offaly descended on the Dáil, and there was this kind of wild party about how it was going to be amazing for Offaly because they're now got that power. Well, there was a similar style opening day press conference where the Shelbourne was crammed full of people to celebrate Brian Kerr becoming the manager, and 2 years later he was gone. And the notion of somebody coming through the system again to be the Ireland manager like that, who you invest time in and who has a deep ingrained knowledge of the league, and that got blown away for 15 years. So Kenny, this has to work, and like it took 15 years to get back to that situation. So what I'm saying is, if it doesn't work this time, any manager working in the League of Ireland now can't really begin to dream that at some point he could get into the Ireland system, take the under-21s, be successful with them, be part of the next. Do you know what I mean?
I don't think so. I don't think that is necessarily dependent on, because what if a League of Ireland manager comes through and has managed to get to the Europa League group stages by winning every game 1-0? Not every League of Ireland manager is Stephen Kenny. They might have different philosophies on it. Maybe we produce our own Sam Allardyce. That might be a more attractive prospect to the FAI. I was actually watching that Reeling in the Years episode last week, 2008, when the scenes from Offaly were there. It was outrageous, by the way. But those Shelbourne scenes were there for Stan. Were they not? Were
No,
they not there
no.
for Giovanni Trapattoni?
No, absolutely not. No. When Stan came in, his first press conference was a complete joke. That was the "I'm the gaffer, the buck stops with me." That was his, and there was no hooting, hollering, and there was no surge of people. There were members of the public at the press conference celebrating, as in League of Ireland people and FAI people were celebrating when Kerr got the gig, but there wasn't when Stan got the gig, and there certainly wasn't when Trapp got the gig. It was like, oh, let's go and see the famous manager. But it wasn't this rising up of somebody from inside the system. It felt like Kerr was breaking a glass ceiling again, back to like you could actually come through the Irish football system. And Stephen Kenny's come through the Irish football system. And lest anybody mistake this, I am dying for Stephen Kenny to work, because it would be an unveiling of Irish football culture in a way that would actually break us from this reliance on essentially mediocre talent who happen to make it at championship level in England.
But what is the Irish football system? Is it you specifically mean the League of Ireland here, obviously, but does the Irish football system not take credit for doing their own coaching badges? And if Robbie Keane happens to become a great manager all of a sudden,
happy days if Robbie Keane becomes a great manager.
Take credit for that because he did his coaching badges here. Like I don't think this is the be all and end all for the hopes and dreams of League of Ireland managers, because I think that is actually the glass ceiling has been shattered. I think that Stephen Kenny's international career as a manager has already, what he's done so far has been a success. Like this is not his.
This is all that matters. This is the only show in town. The under 21s doesn't matter.
I get that. But it is something, you know. At least there will be at least one small caveat to show for it. I think that if you're a League of Ireland manager, the thing that you are looking at to achieve is to get to where that Dundalk team got to under Stephen Kenny. It is to qualify for a European competition proper. And if you are in that company, then if you're a Europa League manager, then you have to be considered to be brought into the, at the very least, the underage Irish system, which will then give you a pathway into the senior system.
Maybe.
I do agree with you that there is a connection, and like Stephen Kenny and the League of Ireland are inextricably linked. And whatever happens over the next, hopefully, couple of years, will either be a boom for the League of Ireland and its reputation publicly anyway, and people who are into the League of Ireland will not think about the league, and there will be a boom for that, or it will be a little bit of a stick to beat the league with. Whether or not that'll actually practically impact things in the FAI, I'm not so sure.
All right, let's wait and see. 12 minutes past 8. We'll come back to this a little bit later on. If you want to get in touch this morning, 0879 180 180. How much is resting on the shoulders of Stephen Kenny? We'd love to hear from you this morning ahead of the game against Bulgaria tonight. We have a fair idea, I think, of what the team is going to be from all the leaks in the papers over the course of the week. Sheahan is with us. Shane, good morning to you.
Good morning, lads. How are things?
What is going on?
Not a whole pile. I was excited about the match already, but...
Not a whole pile. Everything's going on. This is like one of the best 48 hours of sport that we've ever seen. Not a whole pile. I'll give that one again. What's going on, Shane?
Loads going on, Joe. Oh, my God. I mean, you called it a battle for the soul of the future of Irish football. It's a fair way of putting it. Yeah, and like yourselves, and not putting everything into the result of this match. You mentioned Steve Staunton. I think, wasn't it the 3-0 win over Sweden his reign began with, and Jack Charlton's reign began with a 1-0 defeat against Wales. So it's not a sign of what's to come, but we would love to get tonight started with a win, for sure.
Yeah.
I was actually looking back at a couple of them earlier on. So you think about the recent first games, like Stan's is definitely the most famous, up until, of course, Gibraltar and the weird EasyJet plane circling around in the background as Matt Doherty started on the right wing on that really windy evening when John Delaney was up in the stands. That was pretty famous as well. But I certainly, I had to look at it this morning, I don't remember Mark O'Neill's team beating Latvia 3-0 in his first game, or Trapattoni's first game, and they won all draw with Serbia. Like I would almost go as far as saying that Gibraltar were such a gimme in that game, not that it turned out that way at all in the 90 minutes, but they were such a gimme in that situation that Bulgaria in the Nations League is almost as important an opening game for an Ireland manager as we've seen in recent times, because Sweden was a friendly, Serbia was a friendly, Brian Kerr beat Scotland in a friendly in his first game, Latvia was a friendly, Gibraltar was the only competitive game of a first manager this century up until tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's the start of a new chapter. The 2020 Reeling in the Years episode is already going to be pretty jam-packed, but I hope that the images of Stephen Kenny's first match in charge at an empty stadium in Bulgaria aren't just a footnote. I hope they're the start of something really, really strong, and it's the start of a new era in Irish football. Who knows? I mean, we all have hope.
Yeah, well, there's so much football. There's so much international football to be played in such a short window of time here that, you know, Owen, your point about, in a year's time we'll be able to decide, like, the qualifying for 2 tournaments won't be fully decided in a year's time, but it's not going to be far off it. We'll know, we'll obviously, the Euros will hopefully have been and gone, and we'll have qualified or otherwise for those. So there's an opportunity for him to explode into international management, to set down a marker in the Nations League, to qualify for the Euros, and then to use that as your springboard to qualify for the World Cup. Like, that's the best case scenario here, and it's not off the table at all.
Yeah, like, I don't know, on the point of like exploding onto management, I do think that, and I've said this before, that this is the best time for Stephen Kenny to be coming into the job. It's the best time for any new manager to be starting a job, because everybody is starting from goal at this point. Nobody has a head start. All the people who built up great relationships with their players have kind of taken a step backwards over the last few months. Now, the counter argument to that is that Stephen Kenny has barely got to meet his players before actually taking to the field tonight, which is not ideal. But still, it's a grand time to be starting things, because everybody's starting seemingly to some degree afresh. But no, I don't know. Like, of course, by the end of this calendar year, we will have quite a body of evidence to see how Stephen Kenny will do. But like, we're not just getting to know Stephen Kenny here as well over the next little while as a senior manager. We're hopefully getting to know a few new Irish players in terms of their senior careers, and you're talking about the likes of Adam Ida and Jason Malumbi, and then hopefully the likes of Aaron Connolly will have more of an impact at senior level. The likes of Darragh O'Shea might have more of an impact at senior level if there's a couple of injuries. So there's reasons to be excited on the pitch as well.
There are. Legitimately. Like, look, Troy Parrott has scored 2 goals in pre-season friendlies from Millwall, and everybody is beside themselves with excitement. It's like he's playing against men in friendlies. This is amazing. This is progress. And the finishes are like, wow. And then he's not there, and you're genuinely disappointed. And it's an insane level of expectation to have on somebody who is so young at playing at such a low level at the moment. But at the same time, you can't but be excited about it. So that's why so much rides on it, because we are putting our eggs in the Stephen Kenny basket. We are allowing ourselves to hope and to be heartbroken again. Everybody has kind of healed over the last period of time. The football is restarting, and tonight we get the opportunity, hopefully, to see the team play good football. And here's the thing: if that goes pear-shaped, it's going to be a horrible, nasty breakup, and we are going to go straight into the arms of Sam Allardyce, going, look at these comforting folds of flab. That's perfect. That's exactly what we need, Big Sam. Let me nuzzle.
There's a thought for Wednesday or Thursday morning.
The thing I would say is that, like, I mean, you're talking about the idea that foreign managers and any player really that would be coming up against Ireland would refer to us in fairly disparaging terms or patronise us. I'm not going to lie, folks. The fact that Thomas Delaney referred to us as a tin of beans that you have to open with your bare hands, that was as loved as an Irishman as I've ever felt.
A scene.
I was like, thank you. That is a beautiful thing to say, that we are hard to get into, that we are stubborn as a race, that we are emotionally unavailable as a race. You know, I take pride in that. I think as Irish people, you've really nailed it there, Thomas Delaney. So if we go back to and even if Stephen Kenny has an element of being hard to open as a tin of beans, then I'm okay with that too.
I mean, he does. That's the thing. He certainly does. He's somebody compared him to Jim Gavin in press conferences just recently. So we'll see. Look, again, excitement levels are kind of off the charts, as they should be on the morning that Ireland are playing for the first time in a long time, with a lot on the line. What else is happening today, Shane?
Yeah, we'll have to start with Stephen Kenny taking charge of the Republic of Ireland for the first time tonight. They're in Sofia to play Bulgaria in their opening Nations League game. Kenny has no injury concerns. We should mention as well, I guess, the battle for right back. He has said he's going to play 4 at the back. Seamus Coleman or Matt Doherty. Doherty expected to fill that gap at right back this evening. Kickoff at the Vasilevsky Stadium is at 7:45. And Kenny says he's excited about the new chapter.
I do believe that we have a lot of potential coming through the ranks. I think we've got a lot of good players, exciting attacking players coming through. I think we have a lot of good players in the squad already before I was appointed in the existing squad. And I think it's a huge honour really to manage this group, and I think a huge privilege and we want to do the best that we can.
The other game in the group sees Finland play host to Wales. It's Wales' first match since last November when they beat Hungary to seal a place at the delayed European Championships. Donny van de Beek claims he'll be competing with some of the best midfielders in the world at Manchester United. He signed a 4-year contract at Old Trafford yesterday, having completed a €44 million move from Ajax. And meanwhile, Gareth Bale says his attempts to leave Real Madrid have been frustrated by the club. The Wales forward has fallen out of favour with the Spanish team's manager and a number of their supporters. He's barely featured for Real since the coronavirus lockdown. Bale says he's keen to find regular football and wouldn't rule out a return to the Premier League.
If those options arise, it's something I would look at for sure. And we'll see what happens. We have plenty of time in this transfer window, and I guess a couple of others as well. So time will tell. And mainly I think the reason is the decision's in Real Madrid's hands.
Sam Bennett begins a stage of the Tour de France wearing the green jersey for the first time today. He leads the sprinters' points race after a third-place finish yesterday. Today's sixth stage is a 191-kilometre trek from Le Taille to Mont Aiguillal. Adam Yates wears yellow with a 3-second lead. Home rider Julien Alaphilippe finished on top of the general classification yesterday before being hit with a time penalty. To tennis, women's top seed Karolina Pliskova suffered a shock second-round exit at the US Open last night. She lost in straight sets to the world number 50, Caroline Garcia. Men's top seed Novak Djokovic needed 4 sets to see off England's Kyle Edmund. The 33-year-old Djokovic stays unbeaten this year and won 6-7, 6-3, 6-4, 6-2. Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer, of course, chose not to play in the New York Grand Slam due to fears over COVID-19. Djokovic said after last night's win, he doesn't believe their absence has devalued the tournament.
They're, obviously legends of the sport, and they are greatly missed. But other than them, and maybe Stan, everyone is here. So it's still a very strong field.
Fifth seed Alexander Zverev also needed 4 sets to beat world number 223, Brandon Nakashima. After Tuesday's 5-set epic, Andy Murray is in second-round action today against Canadian Felix Auger-Aliassime. Serena Williams faces Margarita Gasparian of Russia. Gavin Moynihan, Cormac Sharvin and Jonathan Caldwell are in the field for golf's Andalusia Masters, which starts this morning on the European Tour in Spain. Lee Westwood and Thomas Bjorn returned to the Valderrama course, where they made winning Ryder Cup debuts back in 1997. SM Racing Punchestown hosts a flat meeting for the first time since 2002 today. The first of an 8-race card goes to post there at 1:20. At Clonmel in Tipperary, a 7-race card gets underway at 4:05. And finally for me this morning, Brazil's women players will be paid the same as male players for representing their country. All players will be granted the same daily and prize amounts for taking part in preparation periods and games. Their CBF president, Rogerio Cabotlo, says the measures were put in place in March. Australia, Norway and New Zealand are among the nations to previously decide to pay their men and women internationals the very same amount.
Shane, good stuff for that. Plenty to get stuck into. Gareth Bale's transfer saga, and I'm just reading some Guillaume Balaga stuff on Messi. I'm just going to read these here. So pardon me if I stumble over these, because it's literally, I'm halfway through and I'm going, this is kind of interesting. It's 22 minutes past 8 here this morning on OTB AM. Guillaume Balaga, are you ready for a twist in the Messi gate? Hashtag. Yesterday, Alvaro Martin in Presión Alta explained that in a 90% Messi will stay at FCB after the Jorge Messi and Bartomeu meeting, and that Messi will make a definite decision today. So this transfer saga could be over today, and he could be staying. By the way, the same TV channel, TYC Sports, broke the story of Messi telling the club he wanted to leave. The rumour is that their source is excellent. So that's where we are, people. The rumour is that the source is excellent. So this is not like, I have spoken to somebody with knowledge of. The rumour is the source is excellent. The meeting went as expected. Barcelona insists he could only go for 700 million. Bartos said he didn't want him to go and wouldn't negotiate an exit. Offered him again a 2-year renewal with the possibility of leaving at the end of every year. Jorge Messi asked to leave Barcelona for free. Rodrigo, Messi's brother, and his lawyer, Jorge Piquort, went for Messi as well. Bartomeu and the football director, I don't know if it's Javier or Jorge Bordas for Barcelona. No lawyer for the club because they see it as a football problem. Oh, not us. It's not us. You're forcing this through. They asked Messi to return to training and we'll give him a few days if he needs them. Come back soon. If they both insist on the same idea, the next logical step would be for Messi to ask FIFA for a provisional transfer, which apparently he'll get, in brackets, says Guillaume, and Barcelona report him and the next club to FIFA, and then you start a civil court with an unsure conclusion as the judge would determine the transfer fee at some point. Manchester City have always said they won't get involved if there's a court case, and that if the transfer fee is 100 million, they couldn't pay for him. No, I'm sure I believe that. 110 million wages gross a year for 2 seasons. Have a look at their yearly income and wage budget, and the numbers don't add up for City, says Guillaume. But anyway, Jorge Messi has been told in certain terms that City will try till the end, more determined than the rest of the clubs interested. Paris Saint-Germain have said they would try. Juve and Inter see it as an impossibility if a court case and transfer fee are included. Why didn't Messi apply the 10th of June clause on time? That's the big mystery. I refuse to believe that his team forgot about it. Mccarthy is suggesting something which makes sense. By that date, City were still banned in Europe. So there you go. He didn't have somewhere to go. And that all didn't work out. So Jorge Messi will talk to Leo Messi today, and they will both decide their next steps. Messi has had time to imagine going abroad, the implications of a court case, and now he will have to think what staying feels like. So suddenly we're at a much higher percentage that he might stay. We'll get into that a little bit later on as well. Colm Boohig is with us. Colm, good morning to you. How are you?
Greetings, Darnon.
You're here to talk tennis, right? But before we get into tennis, briefly let's talk football. What do you want to ask?
Well, this stems from a discussion that you and I had yesterday, among other members of Off the Ball, which is what constitutes success for the Stephen Kenny era as Republic of Ireland manager. Is it good football? Is it progressive football? Or is it qualifying for tournaments? And that's it, regardless of how we play. And it's a debate that went on longer than expected yesterday, and now here we are, bringing it to the wider world.
Eoin Sheahan, was last year a successful year for the Kerry footballers?
Yes.
Right, so there's your answer. Eoin is happy to wallow in defeat. He'll take a few flashy moments and ultimately failure. So
it's not what it is at all. Like I'm not sure, did you guys come up with a correct answer to your debate yesterday? Because there is a correct answer to the debate. Of course, you can gauge success in more ways than the actual result at the end of the campaign. So that is qualifying for World Cup 2022. Let's actually talk about the next World Cup, because the Euro situation is such a confined space. Something bizarre could happen in this playoff. So let's just ignore that for a moment. For the next World Cup, not qualifying for that, we could live with that if we all of a sudden have an identity that the nation can get behind, that has a new generation of players that are trending in the right direction. Because that is the one complaint that we could have all had about the Mick McCarthy era, was that we didn't really have much of a clue of where was the next step for this team. We kind of felt we were operating off a mediocre level, but worse than that, we almost felt we were operating off the top level possible, operating in such a system, and quite often going into games devoid of a plan. So I'm not sure, did you come up with that with the answer column, but certainly I would think that yes, you will sacrifice the ultimate success if we're going in the right direction.
But what constitutes the right direction? I mean, a style of play and how well we play is ultimately subjective. I mean, let's be honest, Irish football has been in the doldrums for 18 years now. Since the 2002 World Cup, we've had very few great moments. Shane Long at the Aviva against Germany, Euro 2016 against Italy, obviously. I mean, Euro 2012 was a disaster unless you were actually at the tournament. And maybe Sean St. Ledger's goal against Croatia, and that was it. So we've had almost literally a handful of good moments. So what I'm asking really is, like, will we really accept consistent failure to qualify for tournaments? We'll say the next 2 major tournaments, if we're playing quote-unquote good football. But what is good football?
I think the whole notion of writing off tournaments because there is some beautiful crystal palace shimmering in the sky that is just over the horizon is nonsensical. Like, it's a whole generation of footballers who won't actually end up qualifying for tournaments. If you're like, oh, it's grand if we don't qualify for the next one because X, Y, and Z are coming through and they're all going to automatically be good enough to qualify for future tournaments. By getting out of the habit of qualifying for tournaments, you become Scotland, who just can't qualify anymore. Like, is that what we want? The whole, I mean, you definitely have to be a little bit careful here, the baby in the bathwater. Like, Trapattoni got to a tournament, Martin O'Neill got to a tournament. Like, the performance against France in the Euros was really good. Like, there was the template there for the team to go on and become something. And I don't know what happened. I don't understand why the team never under O'Neill played like that again. It makes no sense. It makes no sense that he watched that performance and thought, actually, they're all playing really well, and, you know, never do that again. Never do that again. Never play like that again. That doesn't make any sense to me. But look, I think it's a good question. Oh, and would you take a bunch of scratchy 0-0s and 1-0s in qualification for a tournament if we were playing bad football and then were able to get out of a group at a World Cup?
If that was the guarantee, absolutely, yes, you would have to consider that. But we're not dealing with guarantees here. Like, we can't even have a conversation about the 2022 World Cup until we see who is in our draw for this. Like, so finishing third in a group where we get the poxy draw with the top seed and a handy enough 2 seed, that has a completely different tint in it to not finishing in the top 2 when you've got Germany and another powerhouse in your second seed. Like, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about Bournemouth getting relegated in the Premier League last season by playing a really nice brand of football? Like, because I'm struggling to think of too many examples of teams where we complement their style of football and they end up failing. I don't think these two things are that far apart from one another. I think that one kind of follows from the other, because you're right, Colm, style is subjective. Style is the way we look at things, and it's all in the eye of the beholder, but results aren't. Results are facts. And sometimes I feel that results, getting good results and winning, can often come with this idea that we are playing the right way, because of course we're playing the right way, because we're Irish and we're seeing our team win, and we can't take off those green-tinted spectacles sometimes. So I don't think that they're unlinked. I think that if we're having a conversation about the Stephen Kenny style having been impressive and having worked well, we're probably going to have qualified for tournaments. But if we're still having that conversation and we haven't qualified, then in my opinion, something has gone very right and we are going in the right way.
Well, I would love nothing more than for Ireland to start playing really good football, especially under Stephen Kenny, because I really hope, like most people, that it works out really well for Kenny. But if you think about it, like, just say the last 30 years, in Irish life in general, far beyond sport, some of the greatest moments in this nation has been the Republic of Ireland at international tournaments, regardless of how we played, because it brought the whole country together. It was a collective objective for Ireland to succeed on the international stage, pretty much regardless of how we played. And if we played any sort of cohesive, entertaining, attractive football, it was a bonus. But my question is, realistically, how far can Stephen Kenny take this team in terms of playing really good football? Because remember, it's an international side. It's a part-time job, essentially, in terms of how often you see the players.
It's the same with everybody.
Really hard to get it style.
And for the rivals, and for his opposition. I don't buy the part-time thing at all, because, like, Roberto Mancini doesn't have any more time with the Italian side. Like, it's not like, Spain managed to get that thing going because they had the backbone of the Barcelona team and some other world-class players there, and they had longevity in terms of, actually 2 managers over the course of their period. But notwithstanding
they have
that,
world-class players. They have world-class players, and we don't. Like, what model are we following here? What international team, the equivalent of Ireland's standard, plays really good football?
Iceland.
Are we going out on our own here?
Better football than we did to qualify for last 8 to the Euros? Like, loads of teams have managed to play good football. Most teams. This is a point Nathan made as somebody who is a Nations League aficionado / nerd. Most international teams are playing more progressive football, more effective progressive football. And I think that if we are playing good football and don't qualify because of bad luck, fair enough. I think if we're playing good football and getting beaten 2-0 and 3-0 game after game after game by mediocre opposition, that's a failure. And I think even you, Eoin, would accept that. Like, play good football but lose, and lose repeatedly. No one's going to sign up for that in the long run.
But, like, I mean, I think I don't think we're genuinely going to be sitting here having a conversation saying we play good football, but God, we lost every single time. Like, I just don't see that being a real debate down the line, that we're actually complimenting us and complimenting Stephen Kenny and his team on playing good football, and that's ending up in Ireland losing games. Like, I'm just trying to think of, like, what Nathan has said there is correct, that there is a trend where the smaller or at least mid-tier teams in Europe are playing a brand of football that affords them more opportunities in games, that affords them the opportunity to not park the bus in games. Like, I mean, qualifying for tournaments is, like, by definition what you want to do as an Ireland manager, and it's really important for us because the mere fact of being there is so important for us as a nation who love the big event when it comes to sports. But if you look at it in another way, like you look at the last World Cup, for example, like the Netherlands weren't there, and I guess there was still a sense that they were still going in the right direction beyond that point, and that they had a good crop of youngsters who were going to take it to the next level. I'm not for 1 second comparing us to the Netherlands or saying that they shouldn't have been in that competition, because they absolutely should have qualified. But I'm just saying that there can be hope from not qualifying for things, and I think that we will be able to identify the lack of hope if it's not there, because that's certainly what it was at the end of the Mick McCarthy era, I felt.
This could be our Germany moment. Like, Germany changed after, was it Euro 2000? They had a complete overhaul of their system. And, the last 20 years have been fantastic for Germany. Obviously, we're not going to get to that level. But I would love the idea of Stephen Kenny taking this in a new direction. But ultimately, will it be a success if we're thereabouts in playoffs and just miss out in making a tournament, or even if we're a flop at a tournament?
That's our standard, is thereabouts. Like, Mick McCarthy was thereabouts until Roy Keane dragged us over the line in the 2002 qualifying campaign. Like, Jack Charlton was thereabouts. Obviously, it was a much more difficult era to qualify for tournaments, because you actually had 8 teams who qualified for his first Euros, which is, when you think about it, an absolutely sensational achievement. Look, I don't know if we're going to solve this right now, but we will come back to it. 8:35 this morning. What's the definition of success for everybody out there? 087 180 180 is the number. Colm, you're on to talk about tennis, and the US Open is underway. There is no better US Open champion for Donald Trump's America than Novak Djokovic. They are peas in a pod.
I mean, Novak Djokovic's quest to become popular has been completely derailed over his excursions this past summer. I mean, for hosting his own tournament, which was ill-advised in Serbia, then to contracting coronavirus, for his anti-vax stance, and then setting up his rogue players union, which didn't include any women in it. So PR-wise, it's not been great for Djokovic, but at the same time on the court, he's 25-0 for the year, i.e. he's won every tournament he's played in an admittedly truncated season. So he's unstoppable at the moment, and two of what we would call the big three, aren't in this US Open in Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer. So he essentially has the place to himself, and he'll probably win his 18th Grand Slam, which will bring him to 2 behind Roger Federer. But in terms of the perception of Djokovic, it's at an all-time low, and maybe unless you're Donald Trump.
Yeah, I really hope that something happens that derails him, but you can't really see anybody winning. There's not enough strength and depth in the men's side of the draw, is there?
Well, you have Dominic Thiem, who beat Djokovic in last year's French Open semi-final. Now, Djokovic beat Thiem at this year's Australian Open final, but that went all the way. And then you have very talented players in Daniil Medvedev, who reached last year's final of the US Open against Rafa Nadal. You have Alexander Zverev, and you have Stefanos Tsitsipas. So for the latter three that I mentioned there, they're kind of the future. They're still not quite there. They haven't won a Grand Slam, any of them, and neither is Dominic Thiem, but Thiem's a bit older and seems to be the only player who has consistent enough confidence to actually take it to Djokovic, and he's the number 2 seed. So if everyone plays to their maximum, that could be the decider. And you never know. If Djokovic has an off day, maybe Thiem could do it. I mean, Djokovic lost the first set yesterday to Kyle Edmund of Britain, and Edmund double faulted on 2 break points at the start of the second set, and then Djokovic ran away with it from there. So you just can't give Djokovic any chances. So Thiem has to be 100%, and Djokovic probably has to be about 65 to 70 for this to be any chance of a different Grand Slam winner other than the big three for the first time since the 2016 US Open, when Stan Wawrinka won the title. And Wawrinka is one of many players who isn't playing in this US Open because of the coronavirus.
Benoit Paire was the French player who tested positive on the verge of the start of the tournament. Essentially, they've got a couple of bubbles going in hotels in Long Island, and then they're bussing the players over, and they're giving them their own suites to change in, as opposed to the individual locker rooms. So that's their attempt at replicating what's going on in Disneyland, Disney World, whichever of the Disneys it is in Florida for the NBA. I saw somewhere reporting that Paire is a flamboyant and controversial player. I'm not going to lie, I'd never heard of him before this. So what's his backstory, or why were people saying he's controversial?
He likes to do his own thing. He often says post-court interviews when he wins. He's often talking about enjoying the city that he's currently in. enjoying the nightlife and the women. He did it this year, actually, in the Australian Open warm-up. But he's like, the reason people talk about him is that he is talented. He's reached 3 of the 4 quarterfinals of the Grand Slams. So he does have some substance to his game. But he played last week at the warm-up tournament in the Southern and Western Open, or the Western Southern Open. And he wasn't playing well, and he wasn't feeling well. So I think, was love 6 and love 1 down, and he retired. But he didn't get it checked out for a while. And then a few days later, he got it checked out, and he contracted coronavirus.
Right.
And the problem with Per is that he was in contact with players who actually are playing at this year's US Open. So there's a bubble within a bubble of, I think, about 8 players. And one of them is Kiki Badenovic on the women's side. So she lost her second round match yesterday. And in her post-match interview, she was livid because she said, because of her contact with Per, she had to live this life where essentially she had to stay in one room until it came to her match, and she was allowed out in court and then had to go back to her room again. So she described it as prison. Now, describing it as prison when you're in a well-paid industry is probably ill-advised at this time in the world, but her point overall sort of stands, that these players have absolutely no freedom whatsoever, especially if you're in that cohort of the bubble within a bubble.
So don't play. It's voluntary. Like, come on, it's voluntary.
That's the other side of it.
You get paid a fortune for it. So Andy Murray obviously has a metal hip, and his indomitable spirit is still there. Is he? Surely this is like, this is the last bit. It's like one of those traditional tennis stories where somebody does something in the early stages and you go, it's great, but there's no way he's going to be able to be competitive in the tournament, is there?
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is his last dance. This is incredible. Like I was saying to Joe beforehand, that this is potentially the sports story of the year. Like, take it back now to January 2019, the Australian Open. So Andy Murray plays Roberto Bautista Agut in the first round, loses in 5 sets. So he loses the first 2 sets, wins the next 2 sets, which is exactly what he did in his first round match this year at the US Open. But unlike this year, he lost his 5th set at the Australian Open. And then after that match, when he was on court giving his interview, they played a video for him of a montage of his career and of all of his peers paying tribute to what a great player and friend he was. And it was basically a retirement video. And the camera was half on Murray and half on the video for the viewer at home. And Murray had this look of bewilderment, as if to say, first of all, I had no idea this is going to happen. And secondly, kind of saying, hold on now, I never said I was retiring. Because pre-tournament, he broke down in the press conference saying, I don't think I can play anymore because of his hip. But he never said he was officially retiring. He just said on many occasions, I don't think I can do it anymore. So after that Australian Open last year, he went and got hip surgery, got the metal hip. And he started coming back about this time last year. He's playing mixed doubles with Serena Williams at Wimbledon. And then afterwards, he was playing in the best of 3-setter single matches. He actually won a tournament at Antwerp last year. He beat Stan Wawrinka, who was a 3-time Grand Slam winner, in a final in Antwerp in the best of 3 sets. But this match, the first round this year, is not just his first Grand Slam match since that famous Bautista Agut match. It's his first best of 5 set match since then. So he lost the first 2. He was a break point down in the 3rd. He won the 3rd. He was match point down in the 4th, and he came back and won the whole thing. It doesn't matter if he loses to Felix Auger-Aliassime in the second round today. It doesn't matter. He's had his moments, because that is incredible. The guy has absolutely no right to be playing this level of tennis anymore. That was 20 months ago, that interview on court at the Australian Open. And look at him now, he's just won a Grand Slam match. It's incredible. It's one of his biggest achievements, and this is for a player who's reached 11 Grand Slam finals and won 3 of them.
It's fair enough. It is pretty impressive.
It's class.
Okay, so he's out again. He must be out again fairly soon, because that was yesterday he won. So is he out again today or tomorrow?
Today, yeah. So he played on, what are we now, Thursday. So he played Tuesday. So play generally starts at 5 p.m. Irish time. So he'll be on about 6 or 7 our time tonight.
Let's talk about the women's.
It's decimated, sure.
Well, Serena is still there, and Margaret Court is one of the worst people in any sport ever. And I'm including everybody. She's literally one of the worst people, and so to have her as the alpha of women's tennis, I'm on board Serena's train, no matter where it takes us, and I desperately want her to to knock her off her effing perch, in the immortal words of Alex Ferguson. So go Serena, don't choke again. It looks like she's been good enough over several of the recent Grand Slams, but has been burdened by the weight of history for the first time in her career.
Oh, it's unbelievable, and it's 100% the mental block, because so she went on maternity leave, and then in her absence there was no consistent dominant player. It was different winners all the time of Grand Slams, completely different to the men's side. And then she returned after giving birth, and incredibly has reached 4 Grand Slam finals since then. Bear in mind that she is a few weeks shy of her 39th birthday now. But despite obliterating the competition en route to each of those 4 Grand Slam finals since she's returned, she's been beaten in straight sets in all of those 4 finals. So that's 2 US Open finals in a row and 2 Wimbledon finals in a row. So there's 100% a mental block. But what is going for her at this US Open is, as I was saying, the field on the WTA side is obliterated. So the top 2 players in the world aren't there, in Ash Barty and Simona Halep. The top seed crashed out this morning, Irish time, in Karolina Pliskova, who, it just goes to show how many top players are out of this draw on the women's side. Pliskova is number 1 seed at this US Open. She's never won a Grand Slam. Her best result is the final of the US Open 4 years ago. So if everybody plays to their maximum, Serena should finally equal Margaret Court's record and win her 24th Grand Slam. She hasn't won a Grand Slam since the 2017 Australian Open, but of course she had that break after giving birth. So this is probably her best opportunity, because the 2 best players in the world aren't playing. The defending champion isn't playing, Bianca Andreescu, who beat Williams last year in the final. So the field is open for her, and Pliskova's gone as well. And Coco Gauff has gone too, the teenage sensation. She crashed out in the first round this year. So it's in her hands. She should win it. I would say number 2 seed Sophia Kenin will probably win it. She won the Australian Open this year, which we talked about earlier this year. She beat Garbine Muguruza in the final. She's excellent. She's kind of a younger version of Serena in terms of her competitive nature and her ridiculously fast ground strokes. But Serena should win this. This is her best chance. Bear in mind, like, she's 39 in a few weeks' time. I don't know if she's going to get a chance like this. It's the same with Federer. Like, I don't think Federer is going to add another title. He's out at the moment with knee surgery, or after recovering from knee surgery, and he's 39 as well. Whereas this is Serena's last chance. Like, she has to get it now. I don't think she's going to get it after this.
There's a French Open after this, though, right?
It's ridiculous. It's so funny. So the US Open is the first Grand Slam since COVID-19 became a global pandemic. So the French Open should have been played in early summer, as is tradition. So they postponed it. But they've rescheduled it for 2 weeks after the US Open final. So it's caused consternation in the tennis world. So, for example, Rafa Nadal, the defending men's champion in the US Open, didn't bother entering the tournament because he had to choose between the 2, because obviously there's quarantining issues. And also the fact that you're going from a hard court to a clay court. It's a completely different surface. There's no preparation in between. There's only 2 weeks of a difference. So Nadal said, look, I'll sack off the US Open, even though I'm defending champion, because I'm going to play my tournament, the French Open, and I'm going to try to win my 13th French Open title. And if he does that, which I fully expect him to do, even at 34 years of age, he will equal Federer's 20 Grand Slams. So it was an easy decision for him. But also Stan Wawrinka, who, as I was saying, won the US Open in 2016, the last player other than the big 3 to win a major. He made the same decision. He chose the French over the US. So the French Open, like, is if the US Open field wasn't already decimated, the French Open made sure it was. Whereas Wimbledon, they outright cancelled for the first time since the Second World War, because they actually had an insurance policy that covers pandemics, so they were able to cancel it. So whereas the French Open, they just moved. The US Open never moved. So that's what happened. So
lots of good quality tennis to look forward to, irrespective of what happens over the course of the next month or so. Colm, good stuff. Thanks very much. Give us your prediction for tonight.
Ireland. Ireland will win. 2-1.
Right, good stuff. That's Colm Boohig giving us some thoughts on the tennis and the football this morning. 0879 180 180 is the number. Loads of comments rolling in. I'm going to bring you some of them now. Dave Butler says, first time in a long time, I'm excited about an Ireland game. I think that's a fairly uniform experience here, Eoin. It was hard when, like, Glenn Whelan's been an unbelievable servant for Ireland, but when he was kind of the centrepiece of the Mick McCarthy midfield, you knew what you were going to get, that we were going to be hitting the ball forward and trying to win breaks as opposed to playing it through him. Paul McGee says, Is it possible to have the Irish team play with an identity of a club? No matter the manager, can we have a we play this way model? Is that kind of what Stephen Kenny's getting at there?
I think so. I think that we probably want to actually get towards that. Like, I mean, I was making this point earlier, but it's actually a point you've made on the show loads of times. Like, what was the identity of the Mick McCarthy team? Like, that was the question that was kind of up in the air when he left the job. And it's not as far as what Paul is saying there, what the texter is saying there. Like, we'll probably never get to a we play this way model with an international team. It's going to be so tough. But at least try and get there. Try and get that way. Don't just accept that, we only meet up once every month and that's it. We have to be fairly ad hoc. Yeah. At least try and have some sort of consistency in how you operate.
Brian King says loads of examples of people playing good football and being crap. You just rebrand the manager as being clueless when it does fail, such as Stan. I don't think there was any rebranding required around that, Brian King. I think that's your revisionist history coming in there. And Dara C says, my vote, good football and player development first, progress towards qualification next. Right, time for the papers.
OTB AM.
As you might expect, it is the game tonight that is dominating everything on the papers. Sorry, Edwin van der Sar pens open letter to Manchester United fans. There was a lot of soppiness from Ajax with Danny van de Beek. I don't know what you made of that, Eoin. John Duggan's new column, those that take a stand will be a part of history. Kevin Doyle says why Stephen Kenny's subtle man management could work, and you've got to respect Murray. He is lethal mentally. Luke Jensen, always a great guest, was on the show last night as well. And Gareth Bale is in the papers today. We might briefly touch on Gareth Bale. Here's the Examiner for you, and it's player transfers feed into good vibes for Ireland's new start. Brendan O'Brien's piece about how everybody's feeling pretty confident about life. Can Kenny get Ireland hopes back on track? It is a question that will be answered sooner rather than later. Empty ice baths and serving your own food, the show must go on. So that's what it's actually like for the players in Bulgaria. I think not that many of the journalists actually over there covering the game. Great picture on the back of the Irish Independent. Green day for Sam. So that's Sam Bennett in the green jersey with his mask on. And first Irish man in 31 years or 32 years since Sean Kelly. 89 was the last time we had it. Louth GAA launched probe into spitting incident. So as Tommy points out, spitting at anybody anytime, not good. Spitting at somebody in the middle of a global pandemic where you can transmit your viral load through a gob. Not a great look. The Louth County Board Chairman Peter Fitzpatrick, independent TD, has said that they're going to try and nip it in the bud. Kenny to make big call on Coleman Doherty dilemma. New Ireland boss expected to select €70 million Spurs signing ahead of skipper for opener in Sofia. The Racing Post, Nations League action tonight. Roberto Mancini, Italy, the cream of nations, and the dream team, Enable and Dettori, ready to rumble one more time in Britain after smooth Gallops workout. So if you're into racing, do get a chance to see Enable while you can. And huge call for Kenny. That's the Herald headline on Dan's piece. Same piece from the Indo, of course. And expectations rise as Kenny faces first test is the headline on Emmett Malone's piece to preview the game tonight, where a picture of a pensive Stephen Kenny in Sofia in his Ireland gear, and manager taking nothing for granted. Kenny may turn to some familiar faces for Nations League opener against Bulgaria. So a lot of speculation about what the actual makeup of the team is going to be. And then the tabloids. Take bull by the horns is the Mirror headline. Yes, we can is the Star headline. Rallying the troops, and bull a fast one. Stephen wants to start quickly. Is that your tab of the morning? Can he kick it? Yes, he can is the headline on Gary Breen's piece. Is that the tab of the morning? Do we have a tab of the morning? You're remaining mute there, Eoin. Is that like because you're waiting for something good?
I'm kind of waiting for something good, but absolutely, the winner so far is that headline, sure.
Full throttle is the headline on the Mail, and Leinster plot to stall destructive Stander. We're going to speak with Matty Williams in just a couple of minutes' time about what Leinster need to do to stop CJ Stander and his bullocking runs. And then it is a picture of Adam Yates, who was stunned to be in the yellow jersey after Julien Alaphilippe of the Quickstep team was penalised 20 seconds for taking an illegal feed. So not the leader on the actual track, but the leader in the yellow jersey today. So there you go, and that's the same. Messi seeks $100 million compromise fee is the story in the Telegraph and the story in the back of the London Times. Real Bale hair razor. So Gareth Bale showing everybody the incredible mane of hair that he has. Little flecks of grey through it now at this stage though, so he must be surely feeling that now is the time to go and play some football. He's 31, he's got 2 years left of his deal. 60 million is the gross figure, apparently. 60 million before tax, a little more than 60 million before tax. So that's what you have to pay. You can get him for nothing, according to the back of the London Times this morning. And, you know, maybe 60 million for 2 years of Gareth Bale is enough for some of those teams. Reminder, of course, OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. We've got about 15 minutes here to tease our way through some of these stories in the paper zone. What do you think?
Let's start with Sam Bennett, considering we haven't spoken about him yet this morning. I would contend that Sam Bennett is the most exciting sports person from Ireland right now. Certainly in terms of what you're getting from him whenever you turn on any race, any Grand Tour that he's been involved in recent years, because he is in contention and he's a sprinter. Like, it's just in basic fact that we like to watch things that move very quickly. We don't have a lot of them in Ireland sometimes, even when it comes to our great athletes. It tended to be over middle distance or long distance. But we've got one of the best sprinters in cycling in the world right now in Sam Bennett. And as you mentioned there, the first person since Sean Kelly to hold the green jersey in the Tour de France. So, the story over the last couple of years has been quite interesting. He was obviously riding with the Bora Hansgrohe team until this season, which obviously is Peter Sagan's team. And he would have ridden mostly in the Vuelta and the Giro, won stages in both, but was basically never given a chance to succeed at the Tour, never even given a chance to ride the Tour over the last couple of years because of Sagan. I remember doing a walking tour around Bratislava a couple of years ago, and our tour guide was like, Peter Sagan is the man, he is our national treasure, he is a bit of a diva, but we all love him. There's always this kind of general sense around Sagan that he's like pretty tough to deal with, but he's just obviously this exceptional talent where he's won the points classification at the Tour 7 times, going for a record 8th this year. And I would say if you're Sam Bennett trying to broach the topic of, hey Peter, any chance you might step aside and let me go for green this year, probably a difficult thing to do from what's written about him. Of course, he deserves to have his diva status given what he's done. But basically, Bennett has to change team, goes to quick step floors. And look at him now. Look at him now going past Peter Sagan, taking the green jersey off him. I know it's early doors, very, very early doors. There's a long, long way to go. And Sagan is probably still the favourite. I haven't checked the odds, but I'm sure he's still heavy favourite. But I'm sure there's a little bit of sweetness about Sam Bennett racing into that position in the points classification yesterday, not least because of his own relationship with the Tour de France. As I've already mentioned, the fact that he hasn't really been in the mix to even compete in recent years, but also when you look at the times when he did compete in the Tour de France, the first one he did compete in was 2015, had to abandon that particular Tour de France. In an interview with Sticky Bottle at the time, he said that he was actually urinating blood at one stage, on stage 17 of that. Then the following year, he crashes on stage 1 in Utah Beach. He looks like it's a pretty severe crash, looks like he's done for the Tour, but he rides on, makes it all the way to Paris with a clamp in his hand, but finishes last. He's the Lanterne Rouge. It's a story well told. We all know it.
No, just to explain to people, because a lot of people won't put Sam Bennett with that. So just remind everybody.
Well, he finishes last in the Tour de France, which, people are like, oh, haha, somebody finishes last. But to finish a Tour de France, if anybody's read Rough Ride, if anybody's read any cycling book, they'll know what an achievement that is. But to finish the Tour de France while you actually have something to ride for is one thing. But to do it when you know that you have a chance of finishing last is another thing entirely. He was 5 hours and 17 minutes behind Chris Froome in that year's Tour de France. Now, it was obviously because of that crash and he was carrying...
On the first day?
On the first day.
I put it to you, Eoin, anybody who's ever cycled up a hill knows how difficult it is. And he cycled up every single mountain in France with that injury, which was unbelievably serious, and showed the grit and determination to finish. And the Lanterne Rouge is like this kind of... It's actually something you should be proud of, where it shows that you are one of the hardest bastards in world sport.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. That's the point I'm trying to make here, that is, it's not kind of a source of embarrassment for him. It's a badge of pride, without question, especially the way that he managed to get across the line on that particular occasion. So it's been kind of a whirlwind for him over the last few years. We've been really excited watching him at the Vuelta and at the Giro. As I say, watching a sprinter and watching any sprint finish in particular, it's just amazing stuff. I know it's going to be a summit finish today, but seeing him do it in the Tour de France has been phenomenal. The next step now is to actually just get a stage win at the Tour de France.
Sam Bennett and Peter is it Sagan, not Sagan? I always got this wrong. Sagan. Is that it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Listen to Sean Kelly pronounce it yesterday. It's glorious. It's a glorious Peter Sagan. So anyway, the bookies can't split them. Sam Bennett 5-4 with some, 11-10 with others, and Peter Sagan is evens or 11-10 or 10-11 on best price or worst price, shortest price with others. So and then just a quick Google. This is a career-defining thing. Sagan gets paid about $5 million a year, and he's obviously a global superstar as a result of what he's been doing. But this is Sam Bennett's opportunity to catapult himself into that level, right?
You would have thought so. And if you compare the profile of the two riders, it's not comparable whatsoever. I mean, as you say, Sagan is a genuine superstar, but outside of Froome, possibly the superstar in world cycling, and perhaps in the continent of Europe, he's probably a bigger superstar again. So to actually go toe-to-toe with him, and if it is a proper battle down the home stretch here, we're a huge distance away from the home stretch here, but in a couple of weeks' time, if it is a battle between the two of them for the green jersey and Sam Bennett comes out on top, it'd be pretty epic, to be quite honest with you. So it's a great thing to keep an eye on at the moment, and it's fantastic that he's really getting his opportunity now to shine in the Tour.
He's got a little Ireland flag on his helmet as well, isn't that right?
Yeah, and he was obviously wearing the national champions jersey as Ireland's national champ. Up until yesterday, of course, because now he gets to wear the green jersey.
I was going to say,
other shade of green.
I was going to say, if you're looking out for him today, he'll be the one in the green jersey. I was like, because it's hard to tell them apart. And the overhead angle, you're kind of looking to see where he was. Actually, good point. The best, easiest way, hopefully, for the rest of the month is going to be watch out for the guy in the green jersey, and it's green because it's Ireland, lads. That's it. It's like. Yeah. 087 918 180 is the number if you want to get in touch this morning about anything. Where next, Owen?
Let's just give a brief mention of this Dylan Hartley piece. It's on the back of the London Times this morning. It's been covered, and Dylan Hartley's spoken a lot over the last few weeks. I guess about how reform is needed in rugby. He says that civil war is coming and that the players need to go on strike. He's made reference to the multiple player strikes that we've seen in American sports over the last couple of decades, and he says a similar action needs to be taken by the players in England at the moment. He's talking about the prospect of midweek games, and I think there's an argument to be made that playing every weekend just for a long season is not great for the players, but to throw in midweek games on top of that would be an absolute disaster. It's interesting because he says lockdown would have been a perfect time to fix a lot of these issues, and his tone almost sounds as if he thinks that the opportunity has been missed, that lockdown was this great chance for rugby, particularly in England, to fix many of the troubles it had when it came to player welfare, and they've missed that. And I guess yourself and Keith Wood basically spoke about the opportunities that rugby had every single week on State of the Union. It would be very interesting if there is a movement within the RFU and within the Premiership clubs to actually take this one step further and potentially fight for better welfare in rugby.
It feels like the opportunity was blown. You hope that some conversations that happened during that period will be carried forward into next year. I think there's a lot still to play for, and I think that whenever the decision gets made about what the future of the various tournaments is going to be and what the calendar is going to be, that actually player welfare can be the founding text for that. So you all agree that players can play whatever number of games it is a year, and then you layer on the tournaments that they're going to be available for as part of that. That's, if you start with every player is contracted to play a maximum of 30 games a year, give or take one or two at the end, depending on whether or not they're in a final or whatever, then all of a sudden you can only play 18 league games and 12 internationals, or you can only play 20 league games and 10 internationals, or 25 league games and 5 internationals. And all of a sudden it becomes very clear, this is our domestic competition, this is our international competition, this is how often the international teams have the players for, this is how often the clubs have the players for, and away you go. You just build out from that. And I definitely feel like the players could go on strike, could be more voracious in seizing a little bit of the power that's happening at the moment. Because again, if you look at what's happened, international capital groups have come in and decided to buy up parts of rugby, and when that happens, the players can very clearly see that there is a monetary value placed on their participation. That was the turning point in player and owner relations in American sports history, and it's a well-worn playbook at this point. He's right, the players do need to go on strike and the players do need to stick together. Ideally, they do it across borders so that it's the same result for the players in the islands and in New Zealand and South Africa and Ireland and England. But we'll see what happens. I don't have much confidence that all those things are going to come to pass.
No, for sure. And also, how realistic is the prospect of a unified strike, given the various parties at work, especially in Premiership rugby?
I think that it's probably closer than would be obvious. It doesn't take that much. It takes a few well-positioned, well-regarded individuals to get together and say, what's your situation? Is that acceptable? What's going on at your club? Is that acceptable? And there's definitely been a sense that the players' unions have been very cosy across the world with the leagues, and probably because mostly the unions have tried to look after their players quite well. The owners have been a bit more transactional in their relationship with the players. So I don't know. I don't think it would take that much. You just need some inspirational leaders to emerge and go, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And maybe with all of the issues that Dylan Hartley has had on the field, maybe it's somebody like him who can actually win people over. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see exactly what happens. He's got a book out. Isn't that why he's talking so much at the moment? So maybe we'll hear from him in some detail about this, and we'll stick him on the list for Keith Wood's State of the Union in the next season as well. Right, where are we going next?
Just one last story this morning. I just want to talk a little bit about Dean Henderson, because obviously we've spoken quite a bit about him, particularly in the aftermath of David De Gea's nightmare in the FA Cup semi-final, bit of a nightmare season in general for David De Gea, and about how good Dean Henderson has been. But he has just signed his new 5-year deal at Manchester United. He is in Gareth Southgate's squad, so he has been asked about David De Gea. And I'm not going to lie, I'm loving Dean Henderson's tone here. He says, it wouldn't be clever for me to sit around and not play football. I don't think that would help any parties at all. And now listen for his tone when he's talking about De Gea. David De Gea has been a great goalkeeper first and foremost for many years. He has been phenomenal. I'm so close now, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to put the pressure on. I respect David. He has been a phenomenal servant for the football club, and if not one of the best in recent years, it's down to me. I know what challenges are ahead. I'm well up for it. Nice use of the past tense there, Dean Henderson. He says, De Gea is something I aspire to be, to have a career like him at the club. So I'll be going back in first day of the pre-season, working my bollocks off to get in that starting lineup, because it's something I've always wanted. This is the sort of stuff we need to see when there is a proper head-to-head between goalkeepers, laying it on the line, calling somebody a phenomenal servant, or has been a phenomenal servant, and actually just putting it out there that I want to be number one. Now, we've had Gary Neville coming out, and he was speaking to Sky Sports in the aftermath of these comments yesterday, and he says that he's worried about these comments. He says that the easiest thing in the world would be for Manchester United to let them both play a load of games. Henderson plays in the Cups and De Gea plays in the leagues. They have some sort of agreement. But he feels that it's not going to happen, because De Gea will want to be number one, obviously. He'll want to be the undisputed number one, but Henderson will want his spot. Neville was also saying that Henderson really has a lot to prove, and he's probably right on this to a point. He says that playing in goal for Sheffield United is a lot different than standing out there in that vacuous, empty, massive space, which is the goal mouth at Old Trafford. Now, I'm not sure if it's that different, but I still think the pressure of being Manchester United goalkeeper is different to the pressure of being Sheffield United goalkeeper.
Because you face less shots? Because you have to do less work? Like, come on, this is self-aggrandizing nonsense for Manchester United, I think. And actually, playing in goals, we've seen good quality keepers can play well for whatever team they're playing for. Like, Alisson didn't suddenly feel like, oh, this is such a massive step up. You know, I actually don't agree with that. I think that he's proven himself in the Premier League, get him in the team, and you're going to remove all that doubt, and like maybe you try and recover some value in David De Gea. But I don't know. I'm not on board with what he's saying, particularly because there's going to be nobody in the stadium probably for the first few months of the new season. So it's a perfect time to put somebody in the team, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's just going to be one of the more scrutinised decisions in the Premier League this season.
Yeah.
The Manchester United goalkeeper spot.
All the more reason, I think, to play some young players tonight for Stephen Kenny too, but we can come back to that a little bit later on. We'll talk a bit more about Messi in a little while. The Longines Irish Champions weekend is happening next week. Unfortunately, obviously, there won't be crowds there this year, but thanks to Race and Stay and the Irish National Stud, we've got some tickets to give away this morning to next year's Champions weekend. The winner of those will be entered into the draw to win 2 nights in the 4-star West Grove Hotel and Spa, with arrival on either Friday the 11th or Saturday the 12th of September, so that's next week, including breakfast and a round of golf from Rathsala Golf Club, with transport to Rathsala and back from the hotel included. The overall prize also includes a trip to the Irish National Stud. It is a great prize. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back talking rugby with Matt Williams right after this.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
The Saturday panel on Off the Ball.
There's a growing hostility towards cyclists. We're somehow seen as a nuisance, when in fact we're just people trying to get to work.
I've never ever gotten one bad word said to me about my sexuality, or from the opposition, or from, actually in one bad time, the girl was marking me so tightly, I was like, I have a girlfriend.
I'm not the person I was 10 years ago, and that doesn't worry me. I know I can play good enough golf.
Don't miss the panel every Saturday afternoon, only on Off the Ball.
It's often said about West Cork Distillers that it was built by the people, for the people, sourcing the best local ingredients, adding a little know-how and a lot of time. West Cork Distillers' award-winning whiskies and spirits are now sold in over 70 countries. Discover the taste of the finest craft whiskey and spirits at West Cork Distillers. Available in good off licenses and from westcorkdistillers.com. Drink responsibly. Visit drinkaware.ie.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
It's 11 minutes past 9 this morning. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. I'm delighted to say Matt Williams is with us to help preview Leinster-Munster and potentially the end of Munster's season. They can obviously extend their season for a week if they win this game. Matt, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
G'day, Jeff. Lovely to talk to you, mate. Very, very well.
I thought your piece last week, where you pointed out that it's hatred that drives the great rivalries, was never more relevant than this week. And to be honest, I'm a lone voice here, but I actually think Munster are going to win this game on the basis of your piece, that the hatred they feel is welling up so strong inside them. Whereas for Leinster, it's like, okay, we've got this domestic issue here, but actually we've got our eyes on a massive European prize down the road. I think Munster are a buzzsaw and Leinster are walking straight into it.
Joe, I'm not with you on that one completely. I think it's very close, and I think Munster have closed the gap again because of this incredible rivalry and this and actually what I said was a hatred of losing. Both sides just detest the feeling of being beaten by the other, and the humility and the humble pie you've got to quaff down when that occurs. And for the best part of a decade, it's been Munster that have been doing the humble pie eating, and that's just sticking with them so bad. I think the shutdowns really helped Munster. I think their 3 coaches here, we've got Roundtree and Bernie Larkham, and obviously Coach Van Grand there. It's given them more time with the players. They've got a lot of time away from playing. They're much more organised. And so the gap has been bridged. Whether it's and we saw that the other day. That was for 2 teams that have been away from rugby for the best part of 6 months. That was a cracking game of rugby. The quality was high, but Leinster, as they have done all year, were just too good. Now I think it's a lot's going to depend on the fitness of the Munster players, how they bounce up. They're going to all play 3 in a row, where the Leinster players didn't play last week. I think 1 or 2 of them might back up. I don't think many of them. Most of them will come from that Munster game, and they'll be fresh. So I'd still back Leinster, but the gap is getting smaller and smaller, which is wonderful for Irish rugby, and full credit to the Munster guys. But I think when the champions are still there and they've still got their hand on it, they're going to be hard to throw.
It feels that there's almost like a rematch element to this, Matt, given the last game was so recent. What areas did Munster target when it came to Leinster a couple of weeks ago that they can retarget, and if they do so effectively, they can perhaps find a serious edge in this game?
Well, I think the old story remains true. Forwards win the games and backs score the points. And the Munster forwards disrupted Leinster probably like I haven't seen for a long time, especially in the line-out. And, you know, that's where Dev Toner, I think, will come back into that Leinster side. Dev had a very good game the following week against Ulster, and I think he's a master of the line-out. He's a great defensive caller of the line-out. I think he'll come back into that. And obviously the injury to Snyman is just so heartbreaking for everyone, for the player, for the whole competition. He's a phenomenal athlete, and to be robbed of him in the first game is unspeakably bad luck for the organisation and the man himself. But I think Leinster will have an advantage there, and Munster will have to step up in that. Conor Murray box kicking, it's just so hard to handle. It's boring. I hate it, but I've got to say it's a very effective tactic. And perhaps, you know, Lama didn't have his best game. Whether we see Lama go to the wing and Robbie Kearney comes back for one of his last games, that might occur. I think it's a long shot. I think one bad game doesn't take Lama out. But right across, like where Munster have improved, if you pick the combined team, most of the team, 75 to 80%, would be Leinster. And that's the difference that Munster just can't get past. They're making semi-finals of all these competitions, but they just can't get past these really big sides like Saracens before their relegation and Leinster. And I just can't see their forwards matching the Leinster forwards for the whole 80 minutes, especially off the bench as well. I think Leinster will have a stronger bench, so that will be interesting. You know, Rhys Ruddock I expect to be on the bench. Whether Furlong comes through or not, we still don't know. But that's going to be a very strong Leinster bench as well. And I just don't think Munster have got the quality there with the injuries that they're facing.
Just on that point you made about Jordan Larmour there, Matt, from those few moments of, I don't know what it was, maybe sloppiness, but your first game back in a few months, from those moments of sloppiness against Munster, especially high in the air, is there any start of an air of concern from you about that at all? Because, like, to me, if Rob Kearney is being linked with the 15 jersey this weekend, it's pretty much a statement that Leinster needed to bolster their options in the air and perhaps weren't overly happy with his performance 2 weeks ago.
I don't think anyone, especially Jordan, would be happy with his performance. But we have to go back and say he has played exceptionally well for a very long period of time. And we all have bad games. We all have bad games. Even the greatest have bad games. He had a bad day at the office. And that bad day was he didn't handle the kicks well. And you've got to say that the Munster, the kicking was spot on, and he didn't come up with it that day. Now, he'll go away and work at it. He's handled the kicks well in the past, so I wouldn't be overly concerned with it. But I think the fact that there's a few injuries on the Leinster wing could open the opportunity for Rob to come back. I don't think that's a high probability. I think it's a possibility. If I know Leo, he will stick with Jordan and show faith in him. And Leo's got his selections absolutely spot on for a couple of years now. You know, when he picks a completely different side that goes out against Ulster, and you look through that side and the youthfulness and the inexperience of that Leinster side going up against an Ulster side that had performed very, very well through the season pre-COVID. And yet they come out and they play this wonderful brand of rugby and win brilliantly. So you've got to say that Leo knows what he's doing. It was unfortunate for Jordan, but that's, as I said, one game. If he does it 4 games in a row, yeah, okay, we've got a problem. But one game is a motivation for him rather than anything else.
I suppose you want to make sure that you have him back firing for the rest of the season as well. And when do you give him that opportunity? In a quarter-final against Saracens, you can't really do that. So it's either this week and you hope that you win, or it's next week in the final. And these decisions do become very high wire at this stage of the season.
They do, Jer, and you know, again, I try not to be biased. You know, Leo is a guy I coached. I have great respect for him as a person. I regard him as a friend. But I have to say, just putting all that aside, I've looked at some of his decisions, selection decisions, and I've gone, wow, that's a big call. I'll take you back to the pool games against Northampton, where he selected a side to go away to Franklin Gardens and left out Furlong, left out so many big names. And I went, gee, that's a huge call. The team come out and perform and smash Northampton away at Franklin Gardens. He then makes 7 or 8 changes, maybe more, I think it was, including the bench, might have been 9 changes to come back to the Aviva. And those guys come out and perform for him. So he's really got that ability to drop someone, for want of a better term, or not select them, but bring them back a week later and they're motivated and they'll play for him because they know the competition within the group is so high. And so there's 2 parts to that. The Leinster players, when they're not selected, aren't putting their tail between their legs, taking their bat and ball and going home. They're responding as a coach wants. They're saying, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to fight for my position when I get a chance. And Leo, as a very smart coach, is giving those players a second chance. They might have to wait a week or 2 weeks, but he's doing it. So I don't expect him to do anything that would take away from Jordan Lama's confidence, because the kid, he's not a kid anymore, he's a man. He's playing really good rugby. He's developed into a high-quality fullback that had a bad day. So I think the way Leo manages his selection of Jordan will bring out the best in him, if it's this week or the week after, whenever he gets his next opportunity.
There's no sense, though, that he's actually just a better winger than a fullback. Is that a possibility, particularly when the debate is now open at Ireland level and Stockdale is starting to play well at fullback too?
Yeah, it's a nice problem to have, isn't it? It's a really nice problem to have. Again, Gerard, I'm open to the discussion, and I always love you have pick 3 fullbacks on the wing. New Zealand have been doing it for years. With Ben Smith was fullback for his province, but played most of his rugby on the wing for New Zealand. I take you back to the great David Campuzzi, who was fullback, left, right and centre, but on the wing for Australia. And Bobby Edgerton, was on the wing in the 91 World Cup, had 150 first-grade games in Sydney as a fullback. So I've got no problems with having 3 fullbacks in that position for Ireland. But I would, in Lama's defence, he's been really good. At the beginning of his time at fullback, he was out, and I said he was out. He needed time. He was about a metre out of position, and a fullback that can make you look 100 metres out. But he has got a lot better. I think Robbie Kearney's mentored him. Full credit to Robbie, his generosity in the way he's teaching. He's passed his information on to a younger player. And I thought Jordan played very well last year. So he has got some runs on the board as a good fullback and being in position and doing the right thing. Last week wasn't good. If you come back and you play well again, all's forgiven, let's move on. We all have bad days. But I think to write him off on one selection is wrong. I used to speak to some really great, wise men in the old days that were just selectors in the amateur days. And they would always say, you never make a selection on 1 game, you make a selection on 6 games. And if we balance out Jordan on his last 6 performances, he holds that position.
And look, the tyranny of now is obviously what we're talking about now. The most recent piece of evidence that we have is a couple of high balls that he got under and didn't compete for. But if you're Leo Cullen, you're thinking, what's next season like? What's the season after that like? Where does he flower as an international quality player, as somebody who has already been name-checked by the head coach of the Lions as somebody he wants to have in his team? So, look, I think you're right. They have to make that commitment to him. Can I ask you about Munster and what you've seen from Stephen Larkham? It's been such a weird period. Obviously, it was interrupted. He did get the opportunity to work with them. Like, what are the hallmarks of what we should expect down the road? And are you beginning to see any of that made evident just yet?
Oh, yeah. Look, Stephen was a great player, not a good player, a great player, who unfortunately I coached against many times for the Waratahs in Scotland when he was playing for the Brumbies and for Australia. And Stephen was a great thinker, a sensational player, and did an exceptionally good job as a coach. And he's only a young coach, and I felt leaving Australia, leaving the Brumbies, would do him the world of good. Coming into Munster, into a different environment very supportive of him. As Irish rugby is of foreign coaches, I certainly can vouch for that. But he's a smart guy and he knows what he wants. I saw some great things happening at Munster in the way they were attacking last year, but the players needed time to evolve into it. When they played Racing at Thomond Park, where they just lost, they probably had created 3 or 4 other try-scoring opportunities through the systems that I could see Stephen was putting into place. But the players' individual errors cost them those tries. Now, as the players become more comfortable with the concepts that Stephen's bringing and where he's taking the team, which is a very different path for Munster from where they've been from the last 7 or 8 years, they'll move forward and they'll improve. The same's going to be said for Roundtree with the way he's taking his pack forward. But I think the biggest issue for Munster, which I haven't seen enough of this year, or since the resumption, to make a comment on, the biggest issue for Munster is their defence. When the teams get in behind Munster, in other words, just get their nose through that front line, they tend to score tries pretty easily. And Munster's secondary defence for a number of years has been poor. And certainly that day, in that game that I was talking of at Thomond Park against Racing, it wasn't their offence that cost them, it was their defence. Racing got in behind them a number of times, and it was just so easy to score a try. I think if we remember, the little chips through which all resulted in tries. And that's Munster's big problem for me at the moment. And I think they will get better under Stephen Larkham, and I think Stephen Larkham will get better working with Munster. So I'm really looking forward to the coming season. We definitely haven't seen the best of that coaching group yet, because they've only had such short time together. But the break will do them good more than any other team in Ireland. I think the break will have done Munster good.
Who's responsible for secondary defence, Matt, and how do you fix that?
It's a good question. I don't really know who's in charge of that. I'll spin you back a few years to Racing as well. I think it was at Bordeaux in a semi-final, and the Munster boys hate me talking about it because I wrote them like a favourite out of Punchestown because it was poor. They didn't like it, but I just told the truth. It was below standard. Every single time Teddy Thomas got through, they scored a try. And it was poor. So, to me, if you keep doing the same thing against the same opposition and they keep picking it and you don't change, that's the coach's fault. And I think the coaches have to really look at what they're doing with Conor Murray. They're standing all their players up to show one line of defence. So they're putting 14 guys in the line, one guy behind. Now, that has not worked for them in their 22. As soon as someone puts a little kick through or there's a chip over the top or even an offload, it's a try. So they're putting all their eggs in that one basket, and teams that are adventurous like Racing, it's just not effective against. So if it was me, I'd change it up. And Leinster know exactly that same thing. Short kicking games against Munster rip them apart. So they've got to do something, especially in their own 22, where they've got more than one player behind that front line. Now, some people say, oh, that's old school, it's all that. And I don't buy any of that. I think that's crap. You've got to do what's effective. I don't care if it's from 20 years ago or 20 years in the future. What's effective? And right now, Munster's defence in their own half is not effective once teams get behind them. And that falls at Coach Van Graan's feet, because he's got to make those decisions on who's going to do that change to their structure. Just as it would to Larkham, the change to their offensive structure, they've got to change their defensive structure.
Can we come out and take a bigger look at where Irish rugby is and the importance of this rivalry? It really feels like, if we look historically, the brilliant Munster team set the standard for Irish rugby, and Leinster eventually caught up to them, and obviously have passed them out now. For Irish rugby to reach the absolute peak that it could reach, and we always talk about a World Cup quarter-final being as far as we've ever got, we actually really need Munster to be as good as they were when they were capable of winning Heineken Cups. And we need them to be able to beat Leinster. In some ways, the best result for Irish rugby might be a brilliant performance from Leinster, but one that's even better from Munster this weekend, where they do beat them and this rivalry explodes into the next level. Because it's not a rivalry if one team always wins.
Yeah, you're right, Joe. You're right, Joe. Like it is a rivalry, because you've got to understand that even when I was there 20 years ago, we played Munster 5 times in my time there, and we only lost once. When I was up at Ulster, we played Munster 4 times, and we lost once. So, this concept that Munster team, who were winning European Cups, were always dominating Irish rugby, doesn't really hold water. And that hatred that Munster had of being beaten, if you speak to Ron O'Gara back to 20 years ago, the first Celtic League, he said that drove so much of that determination they were never going to feel that again. Where what it did to Leinster, it gave Leinster the ability to say, hey, look, these are European champions. We can take these guys on. And same thing with Ulster when that they went on to make a European Cup. So it was a European Cup final, they got walloped in it. But in front of all that, even though Leinster and Ulster were behind Munster and they weren't seen as being equal to them, that drove Munster on. Now, the same thing is happening to Leinster. Even though Munster and Ulster and the other provinces are seen to be behind them, that's still driving them on. And Munster keeps stepping up, and Ulster stepped up, and Connacht stepped up. Connacht won a competition a few years ago, and that's driven Leinster to step up again. The amazing thing about what it's done to Leinster is the creation of an academy system and a process where Leinster are winning Europe with 20 of their 23 coming from their academy system. That's been the biggest catalyst. Now, that is great for Irish rugby because if you look at Munster, there's 2 or 3 Leinster guys in it. You look up north in Ulster, there's 3 or 4 Leinster guys in it. You go over in Galway, the same sort of thing. So what the other provinces have got to do now, so what have we got to do? We've got to come back to our school system. We've got to put into our schools. We've got to drive our academies because that's what Leinster are doing. And if we can start getting to the point where each of the provinces has 20 homegrown boys in their 23, that's been a huge step forward. So what does that mean to the national coach? The national coach has got all these guys that can step forward. So you don't have to be beaten to still drive the competition within the country. And it's very interesting talking to the Munster guys of my generation who were opposition. And even though there was rivalry and, bordered on fanaticism and obsession, and we said things and did things we probably all regret, now that's turned to respect and friendship. And we talk about what it was and what that drove and how it did. And it's a really nice conversation, but one that's still valid today. Because when these guys retire, when Sexton retires and let's say Peter O'Mahony retires, it'd be really interesting for them when they can speak honestly about what it does. Because you can't really speak honestly. The current players, can't speak honestly about what that rivalry really is. And a lot of the times I hear the boys from the past speaking and I'm going, you're just putting a bit of sugar on top of that because you really hated us and we really hated you and we said things that were bad and you did things that were bad. Like that. But it was great. It wasn't over the top. It occasionally got a little bit out of hand, but it just drove performance. It drove training, and it created. It should have created more Six Nation Championships wins. It had won some Triple Crowns, but certainly it put together the last couple. And then when you had a great coach like Joe Schmidt at the top, it pushes it on. So whoops, my camera just slipped off. Sorry. I think it's a really healthy thing, mate. And I look, if Leinster keep winning and they keep getting pushed forward, that's life. That's life. Munster have got to step up and do it. And the beauty of that is they can't talk your way into it. You've got to act it. Munster can't say, Ron O'Gara's era and Paul O'Connell's era. They were brilliant. They were. What's this era going to do? What have they got to do? So they've got to find 5%, 3%, just that little bit more for another 80 minutes, and that'll drive it on again. If they can't, then Leinster keep going forward. And that's a healthy thing also.
It sounds like you're predicting a Leinster win in a close game. Is that fair enough?
I think that's a fair summation, Jib, because I haven't got any evidence to go against it. So I try, I've got a lot of affection for Leinster, and I as I've said before, Leo's a friend of mine. But if I didn't think they could win, and which I said in last year's European Cup final against Saracens, I said, well, I think Saracens will win. I'd say it. I think it's going to be a very close game again. But I think the depth that Leinster have, players coming back, and winning's a habit. Winning is just as much a habit as losing. I think they'll take it on, and I think they'll get through this week. But it will be close. And if Munster got up and won, I wouldn't be surprised because they're improving, and they'll continue to improve this year. As long as they get their defence right in their own half, that'll be the key.
Matt Williams, good stuff. Great to talk to you. Thanks a million.
Lovely to talk to you guys. Keep safe.
It's Matt Williams there giving us his thoughts on Leinster-Munster tomorrow night. We'll have Alan Quinlan on the show tomorrow as well for our final preview of that, and we'll obviously keep you up to date with it on all of our platforms from tomorrow evening. I think it's a 7:45, I want to say, maybe perhaps even an 8 o'clock kickoff actually. A reminder, OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Eoin, what's your prediction for that game?
Leinster are going to win.
By much?
10 points. Leinster by 10 points. Well, it was 2 points in the last game. Oof. Maybe the more I'm talking myself into, the more I'm kind of like the Snyman injury doesn't really make a difference, considering he's only on the pitch for 7 minutes on that particular occasion. I still think Leinster probably have less errors in them than Munster do. Munster played closer to their peak, I would have thought, 2 weeks ago than Leinster did. So I think Leinster will win. And this same old story, just a different encounter, where you seem to be, you are yerrying.
I'm not. Honestly, when Munster kicked the ball out, they've been hammered for it. I actually think that that was Peter Marney going, we'll see you in 2 weeks, lads. We've seen your very best. We've been absolutely decimated by injuries. We've lost 3 of our leaders from the pack, including our bench depth, which was supposed to relieve us. I see you. I see all you've done, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And it was Roy Keane in the corridor to Patrick Vieira, and that's what I expect to happen. A couple of Roy Keane goals, and away we go. Did he score those? He did score that day. Yeah, that's what's going to happen.
Patrick Vieira, obviously part of the Invincibles. Leinster trying to become the Invincibles. The connections are all there.
Think about it. Think about what's on the line. An unbeaten season for Leinster, and Munster having to swallow that for the rest of their lives. Imagine. No way. No, I don't think they're going to let that happen. Do you think they're going to let that happen?
I think because the fact that it's a semi-final more than the unbeaten season, I don't think Munster care a jot about Leinster doing an unbeaten season.
Yes, they do.
They care about beating in the semi-final. You know, I mean, they've been beaten in pretty famous semi-finals in the past.
And this is your chance to stop it.
So, yeah, stopping winning the silverware, because I think the Pro 14 was kind of written off as Leinster were going to saunter home. I think that was the case before lockdown.
It was.
By far, Pro 14. And then all of a sudden, you had the 2 South Africans World Cup winners coming up before the end of the season, which was never supposed to happen in the first place. So even though De Allende has kind of split opinion in his first couple of games, I still think it's time for him to ride this weekend.
Well, and you saw how fractious he was with Sexton and how he was like leading the charge. I mean, that was like, if you're a Munster fan, you're like, yeah, get in there, go on.
Keep player cam on De Allende and just see how much he gravitates towards Sexton and how much he tries to aggravate him, because it didn't work 2 weeks ago, because to work you would have needed a big reaction from Sexton, but it came close to working, as in Sexton came to a simmer. He might come to a boil tomorrow night.
I await this with bated breath. I'm almost as excited about that as I am about Ireland tonight. What's your prediction for that?
1-0 Ireland.
I'd be happy with that. That would be a great start. A reminder, good morning, start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Golf Weekly fans out there are probably very well aware of our next guest. Jeff Benedict was part of the duo behind the explosive 2018 Tiger Woods biography. His latest book, The Dynasty, takes us inside the New England Patriots, Brady, Belichick, Kraft era. It's a brilliant bit of work, and I got the opportunity to sit down with Jeff recently. Have a look.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
I am delighted to say we've got Jeff Benedict with us. His new book, The Dynasty, the inside story of the NFL's most successful and controversial franchise, is released this week. A couple of quick questions before we get into the meat and bones of this, Jeff. One thing I'm always interested in is when you spend so much time researching a project like this, is there ever part of it which becomes a little bit of Stockholm Syndrome, where you begin to really like the people that you're covering?
That's a great question. Definitely. That actually happens. It's happened in pretty much all of my books, and in some of the longer articles I've written that take 6 months or more to write. When you get close to people and you really get an opportunity to get into their personal lives and understand who they are as human beings, there's a lot to like. And that certainly happened in this book. I developed a lot of appreciation and I would say affection for some of the people that I wrote about and got to know in the course of this project.
In parallel to that, what's your own personal view, having been through this whole process before? with the New York Times bestselling Tiger Woods biography. What do you think now of where Tiger is and how your research into him shaped your thought and relationship with him is kind of what I'm hinting at. Like, how do you feel about Tiger Woods now?
Well, it's interesting. I didn't know anything about him other than the publicly reported material about him, but I had no connection to him before working on his biography. And I'm also not a golf fan, so I don't watch golf. He's not someone that I followed closely as a spectator. So I came into it with a very open mind and pretty objective. And as the longer we went through that project, the more admiration I developed for him as a person, not as a golfer. I mean, I already admired him as the most accomplished golfer ever, but I'm talking about more his personal character. And so I would say that my appreciation and understanding of that deepened as the project went on. I think it's important for particularly people in my shoes who write biographies. One of the most important qualities of a journalist in that genre is empathy. My motto is less judgment, more empathy. And as I went through the Tiger Woods process, I developed more and more depth of appreciation for him. And I went through the same thing with the New England Patriots because I didn't have any relationship with any of the main characters in the New England Patriots saga either. I'd never covered the team. I've never been in their press box. I'm not a football beat writer. So I came into it with a very similar approach that I did with Tiger Woods, which is it's all new to me. And I'm starting with a clean slate and an open mind.
Was this a bit more difficult to start with a clean slate in some respects, given how all-consuming for the sports media, at least, the Deflategate scandal had been, and just for the level of coverage that there's been around Belichick and Brady for such a long period of time?
Well, it's similar to Tiger. I mean, I don't think there's an athlete on the planet who's had more saturation coverage than Tiger Woods. And his, some of the things that have happened in his past that would be considered scandalous, I was certainly well aware of all of that going into that project. So in the Patriots project, things like Deflategate or Spygate, obviously I was well versed in those like everybody else. How could you not be? That didn't really color anything I was doing because I'm really in this case writing a biography not about a person, but this is more like a biography on a franchise or an organization. And I focused on three key people in that story: the owner, Robert Kraft, the coach, Bill Belichick, and the quarterback, Tom Brady, but then a lot of other players and personnel in that story as well. But I think the idea here is to try to get into, when you deal with Deflategate or Spygate, is to look at those situations from the perspective of the individuals who are in it. And that's the new part, is how did they see it? How did they deal with it? How did they use it going forward? And I think that that's the real interesting part of the story. And all of that was new to me.
I think it's really interesting to hear that, because one of the binary things that's happened, particularly over the last 2.5 or 3 years, when it became maybe not clear that the Brady-Belichick relationship was going to end, but that it might end. There was this very pronounced public debate about who was responsible, who gets the credit. It's a credit sandwich, but who gets to eat more, who bites more. And actually, the whole point of the book, I think, is particularly the way it starts, is that this isn't a binary thing. The credit isn't shared out among two men. The owner has to get an unbelievable amount of credit in this too, and ultimately it's his franchise. He is the one who collects the trophy at the end. And for Europeans watching sport, by the way, that's a very, very strange thing, because here the captain of the soccer team and all the other sports picks up the trophy. There's never an owner who wanders onto the field in a suit. It's always somebody who's bloodied and grass stained. And as a watcher of American sports, every year you're like, oh, this is very strange. But your book does a really good job. We're starting at the start, and if everybody's going to reduce this to a binary, who's the greatest? It's like, well, it's a tripartite dialectic that is required around this.
Yeah, you make an interesting point. American football does have a tradition that when a team wins a championship, it's the owner of the team that typically is handed the trophy first. And then tradition is the owner then hands it to the coach, and the coach usually hands it to the quarterback. And the Patriots have certainly followed that tradition. But I think what gets lost in our American tradition is that the role of the owner is not as obvious to fans. The role of the head coach and the quarterback is easy to see because one of them is wearing a helmet and the other one's wearing a headset, and they're on the field for every game and they're on television. And Brady and Belichick, deservingly so, have been at the forefront of the credit in New England for the last 20 years. But one of the things I wanted to really explore more in the dynasty was the role of the owner, because in this case, probably more than any other American sports team, the role of the owner has been incredibly critical to the championships, and yet it's been so understated and misunderstood. And if I could sum it up, one of the most interesting things that was said to me in all of the interviews I did for this book was I interviewed Rupert Murdoch, the CEO and founder of Fox News. And Rupert said to me, what was very interesting, he said, the thing about Robert Kraft is he's the ultimate diplomat. If he had gone into politics, he would have gone down in history as one of the greatest diplomats in American history. But he went into other businesses like sports. His diplomacy, his ability to keep Bill Belichick and Tom Brady married and performing together for 20 years is the greatest achievement of his ownership tenure. There's no doubt, because it's what's enabled this dynasty to live longer than any football dynasty in the history of American sport before. So it's 100 years of time, and the Patriots have gone for 20 years. Usually football dynasties in the United States last 10 years at the most. And so I do this comparison in the book where I liken Brady and Belichick to John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And they stayed together, as we know, for less than a decade. They were the greatest band ever, but they couldn't share the same stage for very long. I see Belichick and Brady that way. And the mastery of Kraft's ownership is he figured out a way to keep them together for 20 years. And as a result, they won so many more championships than any other team.
What is that particular part of diplomacy? What's the skill that allows him to do that, do you think?
I think there's two facets to it in this case. In the case of Belichick and Brady, it's number one, appreciating and understanding that the coach you've selected, by the way, a coach that no one else wanted, he picked Belichick when he didn't have a winning record and didn't have a resume for winning as a head coach. He gave him a lot of power and authority to run the team, and Belichick delivered very early and started winning championships. So on Belichick's side, it's delegation. It's delegating authority to him and then allowing him to exercise that authority without interference. That takes a lot of discipline. Most owners aren't disciplined enough to do that, especially when the head coach is making decisions that are unpopular and may be counter to what you think he should be doing. Kraft has been a master at self-discipline and allowing Belichick to operate the way he needs to. On the Brady side of the ledger, I think it's building a personal relationship. This relationship that he has with Tom Brady has become familial. In other words, it's like a father and a son, and it's genuine. It's not fabricated, it's real. And it's been built over a 20-year span. And so these are two guys who actually use the four-letter word LOVE with each other all the time. They love each other as if he is another father figure or if he is another son in the family. That relationship is what helped keep Tom Brady in New England for so much longer than he probably would have been without that relationship.
Jeff, one of your other earlier books was about Steve Young, who comes at the end of one of the great dynasties in the 49ers. And you can see how Bill Walsh was the central figure in the first part, and then obviously they win later on with George Seifert as well. That's a dynasty that kind of has two separate quite distinct eras to it. There's 3 separate distinct eras to the Patriots dynasties, but it's with the same characters in the 2 main positions. That's what I think makes it so remarkable.
There's no question. And I actually I had the benefit of, because I wrote the Steve Young biography with Steve, I had the benefit of knowing a lot about the 49ers dynasty, how it was built, how long it lasted, why it came apart. And I thought about that a lot in writing the book about the Patriots, because interestingly, when Robert Kraft bought the Patriots in the early 1990s, one of the very first things he did was he flew to San Francisco and spent time with the executives who were running the 49ers, because at the time, the 49ers were the kings of the mountain. And so he wanted to see how they built their dynasty. And then he proceeded to build it better in New England. And one of the things that he certainly looked at that really made an impression on him was the departure of Joe Montana, who was then the greatest quarterback of all time. And I think that Robert was really determined, once he realized how good Brady was and how important he was to the franchise, mission number 1 was keeping him in New England for the duration. And so I think that the timing thing is really important with the Patriots, because that's the secret that everyone wants to figure out. There's sort of 2 things. One is, how did they build it? But then more importantly, how do you sustain it? Because there's plenty of teams that win a championship, or they might even win 2, but 6? And in the Patriots case, they went to 9 Super Bowls and won 6 of them.
I've got a follow-up question to that then, because the thing that strikes me immediately off the back of that is Joe Montana being asked the questions at the last Super Bowl. The 49ers were there. He was wheeled out for all sorts of commercial activity. And with a real sadness in his voice when he was asked, what advice would you give to Tom Brady? He was like, stay, don't leave, don't leave. I was like, oh, that's so heartbreaking. All these years later, he thinks that he should have stayed and fought for his place against Steve Young. And the advice that he's giving to the man who is like obviously slightly better, his successor, and somebody who desperately wanted to beat him when he was growing up, is don't leave. Brady didn't listen. So why do you think the relationship eventually breaks down?
Well, first of all, I would actually look at, I love what you just said, by the way, but I would just, on the end of it, I would slightly tweak it and say, I think Brady, in fact, did listen to the advice. If you think about it, he played for the Patriots for twice as long as Joe played for the 49ers. So in reality, he did stay. You know, in other words, it's just by the time Joe gave the advice that he should stay, Tom had sort of done that 10 years earlier, because he could have left 10 years earlier, 8 years earlier, 6 years earlier. There were all these junctures where Tom could have left and didn't. So I actually think he did stay. What's so almost otherworldly is that he's still playing football after 20 years. And he's still at the top of the game. And I think that that's why it's sort of hard for anybody to say to Tom, here's the way you should do it, because he's now doing things that have never been done in the history of the sport. So who can really advise him? You know what I mean? It's just, he's an outlier in a real truest sense of the word. But in terms of how it ended, I think that from my perspective, what I was interested in is the breakup was so unusual in the sense that it was without animosity. It was without finger pointing. It was an amicable split. And usually when there's a divorce, it's not amicable. And whether you're talking about a real marriage between a husband and a wife, or whether you're talking about superstars like John Lennon and Paul McCartney, breakups usually don't go well. This one actually did. They had an incredibly unusual parting. And that's why I chose that scene the way I did. And it also helps explain, I think, why it's not so surprising that in the last 10 years, there was a lot of tension in the Brady, Belichick, Patriots dynamic. But tension comes with greatness. Tension comes with being at the pinnacle year after year after year. If this were a mediocre team, I don't think there would have been much tension. But these guys were at the top of the mountain for 20 years. So you would expect some tension. So that's not the unusual part. The unusual part is that they navigated it for so long without having that, acrimonious breakup?
I think one of the things that the whole world has taken away from The Last Dance is this continuous narrative that Michael Jordan is the alpha dog. He is literally the most competitive person on the planet. I do wonder, though, if there was a similar bank of video footage about Brady and Belichick, we wouldn't actually see that these three men are cut from the same cloth. That actually, you can't really say that Michael Jordan is more competitive than Tom Brady when you look at what Tom Brady puts his body through to get on the field to play the 16 games regular season.
Yeah, I would never get into an argument about whether one is more competitive than the other, because that's an argument you can't really end. But what I would be comfortable saying is, I don't know any athlete who's more competitive than Tom Brady. I mean, so maybe there's maybe there's one or two that are on the same plane, and maybe Michael's one of them, and maybe Tiger Woods is another one. But there's nobody more competitive than Brady, for sure. I think he's demonstrated that over, it's not just 20 years. He's demonstrated that really since high school, the way he fought his way to become something that he wasn't, or at least that people didn't think he was. And then I think what's interesting, the pairing with Belichick, Belichick is the term workaholic is an overused phrase in society and in sports. But you're talking about two guys now in Belichick and Brady who live at the stadium. They live at the stadium. And that kind of fire, they'll win a Super Bowl, and the next morning, instead of celebrating, they're talking about what they have to do to get back here in 364 days. And that mentality never wavered for them. And then I'd add one more thing, which really makes it seem unfair to everybody else, is the ownership. As a businessman, I think Robert Kraft possesses the same kind of competitive intensity to win that he has in his coach and his quarterback. Now, it's not as obviously visible because, again, he's operating in a space that you don't see on television. But I know after observing him for the last 2 years and looking at what he's done over the breadth of his career, it permeates throughout the whole organization. This whole organization is all about one thing: winning all the time.
Jeff, why were so many people happy to work with you on the book and to grant you interviews and to give you access to what they were thinking?
Well, first of all, I don't know if I'd use the word happy. I was happy that they were working with me, but, a lot of times answering questions, especially the kinds of questions that I might ask, which can get to be quite tedious and detailed, it can be, a pain. But I tried to build relationships with the people that I thought were key to telling this story the way I wanted to tell it. And I took a lot of time to do that. And so relationship building is really important when you're trying to develop a level of trust that will allow people, make people comfortable enough that they'll tell you the things that they haven't necessarily talked about before. But I think they have to feel that you're not going to abuse that. And that's the really important part is, in other words, this story needs to be seriously told. It's got to be told in a way that is going to be true and rise to the level of what's gone on here in New England for the last 20 years. And that's not something you can just convince people of when you show up on the first day. I think it took a long time to build that with people. And part of that is just being around folks where I could. I tried to do interviews in people's homes. I think you get a totally different tone and feel to an interview when you're sitting in someone's home as opposed to like in a press room at a stadium or something. I mean, I'll do an interview wherever I can get it, but I tried in this case to try to be in places where people would be more comfortable, where the setting would be more intimate. And I just took a lot of time. I listened, frankly, and watched a lot more than I asked questions.
Is there a sense that the organization is ready for its legacy to begin to be digested in a way similar, I think, a little bit to Jordan reaching a point where people were not underappreciating for forgetting, but like just a kind of reminder that, hang on a second, what we've done here is absolutely incredibly important. It's like Belichick famously wouldn't cooperate with anything for ages, and then over the last couple of years has done a couple of different things, particularly the 100th anniversary of football, where he publicly started to go out and give people access to his brain power. He did a football life, and it was a multi-part football life. So you've got the sense that he was beginning to become cognizant of the fact that as a great football person, his story needs to be told to inspire future generations.
Yeah, I really don't have a sense of whether anybody there has started thinking about legacy. I'd hate to sort of suppose any of that. I don't know. My sense is that everybody there, and including Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski, who are not there anymore, I think the whole group, the Patriots organization, the ownership, Belichick, the players that remain, I think they're still focused on winning. I really do. I don't think anybody is yet looking over their shoulder and thinking about what they've accomplished. I think there's still a lot of forward looking about what could still be done.
Jeff, you obviously have a long history of understanding your own stories as well, and you've seen the various controversies that have come from the stories that you've told in the past. What's your instinct about what people are going to seize on in particularly the talk shows in America? What is going to be the couple of bits and pieces that they pick from this book and go, you've got to read this, wait till you see what so-and-so said?
I hope that the answer to that is, I'll answer it this way. When I started the writing process, my editor said to me that the mandate was he wanted to learn something that he didn't know on every page of the book. The book is almost 600 pages long. And so that's 600 things that he's expecting me to reveal that were not generally known. So I really tried to go places where writers hadn't gone before, to go into rooms, back rooms where important dialogue took place, where just big decisions were made, where heated arguments occurred. And so I think starting really early on, you're in the room where, the first scene of the book is in an emergency room where Drew Bledsoe's life is on the line. And there are some things that happened that night that I think will make news all over the sports world because of what occurred in the ER. And then from there, it just takes off. I think the tension between owner Robert Kraft and head coach Bill Parcells, who was Bill Belichick's predecessor and was Bill Belichick's mentor, those are some of the most intense chapters in the book. And there's a load of material in there that I think will make news. It is new. And then it just sort of goes from there. The way they deal, you mentioned some things like Deflategate and Spygate and Aaron Hernandez. I think the way that the team navigated through those and actually used some of those things as a form of motivation to improve, to become better, to become more disciplined. I think all of those things will be interesting, whether you like the Patriots or not.
So it's only like the last decade or so that I've got super into reading about the NFL, and that opening scene, there are so many bits of it that I had no clue about. Like even the medical process of taking Drew Bledsoe's blood out, cleaning it and putting it back in. I didn't know that the medical science was at that level. I didn't realize that his hematoma was so serious and that he was on the verge of death, and that the three men are there watching this, and that his career is effectively, it looks like his career is over. I didn't realize that they were such good friends either, that the families had become close at that point too. So, I mean, I can see why the challenge of something new on every page is, I guess, fairly intimidating from a writer's perspective when you're added to that, but you get the thing going right out the gate.
It is intimidating. That's a good word, actually, on your part. I found it intimidating. I found the whole experience of writing this book, I'm not saying I was intimidated every day. I don't want to exaggerate, but given what I was writing about and the breadth of it, the size of it, the sort of overwhelming sense that this is a very large story, that part was intimidating. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. I think that scene in the hospital, though, to me, it's the perfect way to bring a reader into a really big story like this. It does a couple of things. It literally puts you in an emergency room, which you usually don't get to go there, and watch a very skilled surgeon save a star athlete's life. And then you have this moment that is, it seems like a Hollywood moment, like it would be made up, when he wakes up from the procedure and he's a little groggy and he's, trying to get his whereabouts of where he is. And as he opens his eyes, he sees his wife sitting beside his hospital bed to the right, and she's kind of rubbing his hand and being there like you'd expect his wife to be. That part is normal. But then when he looks up from his bed to his left side, he sees the owner, Robert Kraft, he sees the head coach, Bill Belichick, and he sees the rookie, Tommy Brady, standing over him like these three almost like mythical figures. Like, what are they doing here? And it's an incredible moment. And they're looking down at him. And I used it because at that moment, nobody in their right mind would have predicted that those three guys, Kraft, Belichick, and Brady, were going to become the nucleus of the greatest American sports dynasty of the century. Because at that moment, the owner had never won a championship. The coach, Bill Belichick, had a career losing record. He didn't have a winning record at that point. And Tom Brady had never started a game. And so the idea that the three of those guys were going to become what they became would have been unthinkable in that moment. And so it's almost like Bledsoe saw the future but didn't realize what he was seeing. And I thought that was a great way to start the book off, and also to just sort of signal to people that we're going to go some places where you never thought you'd get to go. Yeah, no, you're dead right. And that is exactly the overwhelming. You're reading it going, wow, this is absolutely incredible. And the symbolism isn't lost. Anybody who's followed pop culture for the last 20 years gets the symbolism of the three wise men appearing to somebody at a moment of life or death experience. And you've done a great job really living up to the challenge of capturing the greatest sports story in American sports history. So you should rightly be proud of the book. And I wish you every success with it, Jeff. It's been great spending some time in your company. Thanks so much. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Appreciate it.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.